time, they say, is the healer of all wounds. But how can that be true when time is the muddier and falsifier of many a memory, the exacerbator of a hard vendetta, and the very thing that speeds us on to death? For every creature that time treats kindly, there are two less lucky, and there is a turnabout, to be sure, lurking in that happily ever after. You and I know that time could not heal Robert's wounds. Like an inexperienced doctor, it had poked at his tarnished gills and said, "Nope, not much I can do," yet it had expected him to pick up the tab of centuries and pain. It may be more accurate to say, time, stealer of all goods, and intensifier of certain bads. Few things could further exemplify the painful complexicating of time than the return of Alice to her penthouse. The sudden fling of the door let in a flash of yellow-red light, then the door banged back into place, and Alice looked up, wearily, to see Robert facing her from the wooden chair. His jaw was set, for he had determined not to say anything in this moment of their meeting. Alice bustled about, hanging her coat and escaping to the kitchen. Robert turned his head to follow her. Testily she said, "You want me to explain? Fine, I'll try. Dracula got himself lost. I don't know what got into him, and Jaw is on the loose too. I guess Trials is still out. I saw the news report." She opened the fridge with a heavy sigh. A handsome glow illumined her, its colors not unlike the aurora borealis. "I was out so long just thinking, but I just didn't come up with a plan. So many live variables flying around, and I don't know what their priorities are." She spread future foods on the table, several tubes, not unlike those used to hold toothpaste, and a log of tofu, which is a ham-like tofu variant bearing unintuitive pronunciation. "Maybe Adam can—" "Oh, bother. He's gone too." Now Robert stood, turned to fully face her, and folded his hands before himself. It seemed a polite pose, one that might be used to greet a dignitary. He said with some casual flair, "You tell me." This all struck Alice oddly. There was sarcasm here, but, as Alice was not well equipped to detect sarcasm, it only struck her with a glancing blow. "I would tell you if I knew," she said, "but I do appreciate how untroubled you are. It almost puts me at ease, just to watch you." To Robert, Alice's monotone in this moment sounded greatly sarcastic. "You hit the nail on the head," he said, returning fire. "I'm glad you feel that way." He was not glad, though. As expected, Alice was fast returning to her usual mode. This meant little beyond less sighing. "While I'm certain you had many doubts about me, knowing well that I could be a double-crosser," she progressed, "I'm sure that over time, I have addressed those doubts to our general satisfaction, causing you to warm up to me and even, maybe, trust me. I am also willing to postulate that Dracula was merely overeager, Trials merely following her cat-like nature, and Adam, with his valiant heart, worried sick about Dracula's safety. If this were untrue," she said with a brief look at the floor, "I think I'd feel betrayed." Said Robert, agreeing in a certain ironic sense. "One thing's for sure, all this running about calls for a reshaping of our plan." Said Robert, actually agreeing. Before long, they were sitting at the table of futuristic snacks, face to face, folded hands under chin to folded hands under chin. Unfortunately, once here, they found they could not concentrate one whit on the food, both of their brains were whirring. They also found themselves staring harshly into each other's eyes, as if to burrow in and divine certain secrets. Actually, and doubly unfortunately, they became so ensconced in this eye-ward mind-burrowing that they forgot what they were planning entirely. Robert was first to snap out of it, blinking away the trance. Alice rubbed her forehead. "Let's get a pen and notepad or something," said Robert. "Those were uninvented years ago." "Oh, right. Got anything else?" Alice bent under the table, heaved, and brought out what appeared to be a wooden suitcase. When it popped open on the table, however, it showed its true colors, the red and black motley of a chessboard and its pieces. "A little indirect, but it stimulates the mind," she explained. "Interesting," said Robert, "but I only know how to play checkers." "Very well," she replied. "We'll play it like checkers." They set up their armies, pawns mingling indiscriminately with queens and knights, and in between moves and the clacking of wood, they pondered, and spoke. We can go out tonight, said Alice, her king clopping ahead, or we can stay in, wait for the others. Robert moved a pawn. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. We must decide between our safety and some rash heroism. Click. I meant to say, clock, what would you have us do? Alice's hand hovered over a rook. Well, to be honest. A snide thought within Robert said, good, finally. I think we could take this opportunity to stake out the brown house. Robert could hardly resist the urge to shoot up and flip the game board. Already they were in the enemy's camp and in a government agent's house, no less, and now she suggested that they go off script by entering the dragon's mouth without all their reinforcements? He sat pensive, angry words bubbling in the cauldron of his brain, fully convinced that she was a traitor. This was as good as proof. Nah, let's stay inside and start planning for tomorrow, he said, and he clacked a knight on. Alice stared at him. All right, only it wasn't your turn yet. Their game continued, haltingly like this, as the discussion turned to contingencies for the official Brown House break-in. They strove to consider every thinkable scenario, what to do if this person but not this one was there, where to turn if Igor's location could not be determined, when to press on or give up. What city had more splendid lights than New York District of Columbia? The moment the sky turned the slightest apple red, every block smothered itself in lights, artificial nitro lights that were a blanket to those who had adjusted to them. Even to the eye of a foreigner staring up, they melded into a haze of electric fur. Yellow was the canvas, with spots of blue, orange, green, and laser beam pink dotting the plain, all emanating from high-powered street lamps. They buzzed if you climbed the poles and set your ear to them, as Trials had learned. The magical cat did have a streetwise streak, even if she hadn't, her manner of slinking round corners and popping out of view, so natural to witches and felines both, would have been sufficient to carry her safely through a werewolf city. And in former days she had been something of a globe-trekker, one who laughed, admired, and stopped now and again to topple a bucket of water on an unsuspecting head. Yet she had avoided urban places for quite a while now. The sky, that was the first thing, all the stars, natural and artificial, were hidden by newfangled ground light the moment they threatened to appear, and for werewolves to hide the moon they broke was utmost hypocrisy. The people on the sidewalks watching their hologramic palms were the second thing, not much fun to prank them. Push them off the motorized walkways and they acted predictably, with dazed whirling and a quiet huh? And the third thing, unexpected, was just how high werewolf hostility had mounted. The few who saw her in the alleyways kicked trash cans atop her and yelled, "EY. Get the treatment." They did not dial pest control. Oh no, in calling security. They skipped straight to the big guns. More than once, Trials had peered down a packed conveyor sidewalk to see peculiar figures squeezing past troops in riot regalia. Their laser rifles pointed up like stakes. Such a commotion, she mewed the third time. Just for Lil Olmy? How nice. But as she danced back into the alley and sent her double out to lead the firing squad astray, she could not ignore some longing within her for prey more fun to play with. Her meandering took her through Washington Square Park and its dwindling crowd. Brushing past legs, trees, and storied bronze, and then she was inside a rosebush. Looking out at the National Mall where, amazingly, between all the museums, the Capitol, and the Brown House itself, there was open, grassy space, topped with scattered shrubbery. It occurred to her again what this mission was about. And that she could really do some good. In her small way. She'd do it the best she knew how, with tricks, wits, wiles, and beguiles, by putting the Brown House through some trials. But I can't beguile government employees on an empty stomach, not unless they're juicy rodents, she said to herself in the rustling brush. Snacks backs racetracks, she chanted, an assortment of bright orange candy peanuts peppered the dirt. Crestfallen, she said. Ah. I forgot that's what that spell was. She ate them anyway. Lucky for her. The National Mall was the seat of many a picnic. And July was a picnic season. Werewolf families were only just ceasing their gatherings, stashing leftovers in woody baskets, wrapping up their sit-in blankets. We cast our eyes now on one such family. As the kneeling mother packed up, the two children of the family were caught up in a game unique to 31st century werewolf kind. "Bet you can't beat me," growled the first. "Oh. Yeah," cried the second, and neither budged. An unaccustomed observer would think them in a staring contest. But something did move, their mini-moons. Revolving as steady slow as always. The moon swung around and, at the critical juncture where each orbit intersected, they bashed against each other with just enough force to scrape off moon dust. Then the tiny asteroids, now with tiny comet trails, went on their way, one more deeply cracked than the other. The loser cried noisily. "You too," said the mother, appalled as soon as she heard. "Quit roughhousing." Unnoticed behind the picnic basket, Trial snoopily whispered. "Meow, what a stupid game. Talk about playing rough." Then the infuriated mother snapped up the picnic basket, so Trials got her tongue and flitted away. "You've ruined your moons, and you're crying. Now do you see what happens when you play that infernal game? Awoo. Awoo. But Mom, we told you we'd stop if you just bought us flashing robotic battle moons. When I was your age, all we had were marbles and our imaginations." We quickly realized that marbles were boring. So we played using our moons instead. Just like you. And we suffered for it. I'm not giving up this paycheck just for some new moons, come air. Before she could grab the two young impertinents by the arms, a breeze opened the picnic basket. And out popped the head of a crumb-covered cat with a startled look in her eyes. The mother's expression changed like day to night. She jittered and juddered. A CCC. But the loser kid, eyes dried, reached innocently for the cat. "Ah, kitty." With a hiss, Trials threw herself from the basket and thumped off, running for the shadows of shrubland. The mother howled lamentingly. "Oh, good gravy. You kids'll give me a heart attack. Don't let me see you do that again, any of it." Those peanut butter sandwich crusts were more than enough to fuel this expedition. Trials went smirkingly onward, cavorting through briars at full speed like a master rat through a labyrinth. As she did, she savored the lingering nutty taste which filled her mouth even now. She wasted no time in locating the brown house and, with a mighty clang, bumping her snout against its cyber iron gate, snorting the pain away, she backed up, analyzed, and noted that she could slink through the narrow gaps in the bars. But it would do no good to squeeze through and find herself in the middle of a vast yard. This was the brown house. And she had reason to believe its SWAT teams were not the same bumbling oafs as NYDC civilians. Suppose they were all on the level of disgraced Commander Alice, and well, she didn't give much credit to Alice's intelligence. Walking beside the brown house gate, strutting under bushsome thorns, turning two corners, Trials used sharp ears to stake out the scene. She was mapping out the territory of the brown house lawn. The house was at one end, the street at another, and a long walkway bisected it. Down this walkway and at the front doors was some gala. If she had to guess, perfect, she would have said in this moment of discovery, were she not so keen on savoring the taste of the peanut butter she had eaten. From the corner of the brown house lawn popped a black shape like shifting smoke. In mere seconds it had crossed a line of topiary and ornamental trees, rushed before that hairy mastiff of a building, and passed unnoticed into a crowd of wealthy shins. Smoke does not waste time. This drifter ignored the talk of this party and merely followed the flow upward, up a short flight of stairs, into the doorway of this, the seat of all world power. In the cracks between tuxedos and dresses, she began to catch glimpses of the walls, eggshell white, and the brassy edges of presidents' picture frames. She had made it to the foyer. And these were simpletons were none the wiser. Or were they? How could they have been truly witless? Think. Trials, in this post-information age, where one can be tracked by any sense and any trace, and where a precocious black cat has been spotted running rampant, and do recall, a similar cat raised a fuss at Cape Agulhas and made herself a public enemy. Did she really think that nobody would catch her? That this was her playground rather than her trap? Oh, she was well aware. The fact is, however, that her confidence in her skills was sky-high for tonight. She believed a government would be toppled by winging it, and magic would overcome science. So she was not surprised when the eggshell white walls flashed red, when the sirens rang out, and when she began hearing the preparatory clicks of pistols, of guns beyond laser, guns of every make. She was quite relaxed. If anything, when half the crowd scattered and the other half ripped off breakaway cocktail gowns to reveal padded vests, and gathered around her, ascertained her mini-moons, seeming to absorb the red flashes, whirled like little rubies, cinder glints. This was the inescapable fire, and never had she been more in her element. Gloves reached for trials, but could not grab smoke. She used a helmet as her footstool. Leaping out. Already the lasers were flashing in her wake. Careening wildly as if at a raven competent, she observed, almost with a laugh. An officer yelled, "Seal the foyer." The wide doorway she had been racing toward slammed shut, now covered by holosteel with an amethyst glister. Instead of hitting it, Trials swerved into a hard turn like a pivoting mop head and now faced the approaching mob. Here was where the fun began. They raised their guns, and she raised her head, opened her mouth to speak a spell. The words, however, would not come. Nothing would come but the flavor of a recently eaten snack. This time it did not please her. Could not assuage the terror that gripped her heart now. Betrayed her. It had. With peanut butter stuck to her mouth, she could not speak. And a horrible hiss, nearly choked by the mush that had not fully dissolved from her palate, was all that escaped her throat. She cowered. Now not only were the troops so thick as to block all means of escape, but they knew the blocking of her maw, which had helped her escape even death. Between Adam, Dracula, and Jaw, only one craved food. Between all the restaurant options of NYDC, none could satisfy such a one more than Webnovel. Established 1952. Open 24/7. Trillions served. The way Jaw and his riders rose from the ground and into the one empty booth, as if melting in reverse, might have been conspicuous had the scene around them not been so busy. Witness the scuffed tile floor, transversed and paced by werewolves holding war trays, which were coated in a film of hair, as was the fashion. See young and old sitting in picturesque family drama scenes, squabbling over who gets the doggy meal toy or whether the kids may play in the pup tent playground section. Granted, these scenes may be incomprehensible to you, since all werewolves were identical in height, including the one in the stroller whose legs trailed awkwardly on the floor. Adam sat hunched over, adjusting his high collar. Dracula and Jaw straightaway turned to werewolves. Jaw tucked his doughboy helmet under the table, for a measure of inconspicuity. Yes, he was still unclothed. But that was all right, they're all werewolves here. You can't tell me this is the US of A. Pops, said Jaw with a contemptuous suck of his teeth. He sounded fairly youthy. A younger recruit at time of death. No doughboys and no dames. Just dogs from sea to shining sea. I remember when this place was called Monstrous. Looks like wolf bogies overran it all. I'd crush the mini-moon they gave me if it wouldn't blow my cover. As would I. Jaw, Dracula reluctantly lied, smiling gently. The things we do for stealth. And then Sam Spade here, Jaw laughed. Indicating Adam. Golly, it's good to see a regular man again. You'll have to take that getup off when the coast is clear, remind me what a real American looks like. The merely mannish scary creature Adam could form no reply but gulp. Dracula insisted that Adam and Jaw sit while he ordered. A demand which Adam had no problem accepting, but which set Jaw on edge. His teeth began to grind. Burgers danced in his mind. He could order himself. He was no child. Adam wondered how much this Shark-Wolfman ghost knew. Or whether he was even really a ghost. Seeing as he was. After all. Alive. Most likely. The mummy reached out across the plastic table with a blood-stained glove. Wanting Jaw's hand. On the lamb. Are you not? He said. An escapee, nothing but a loose zoo animal. In thoughtless eyes. Yeah. Hamlet, Jaw derided. He deigned not extend a paw. I feel like I'm in a time vortex. Something from one o' those black and white movie pictures that were popular before the war. Sir. Marine Private First Class Pete Masterson. It is the year 3001. As incredularious as it sounds to you and me. Modern pictures have more colors than two, they comprise entire gradients. Some are even painted. With media ranging from oil to acrylic. Private Masterson. Sir. We must exchange stories. And we must help one another man to man. At which point Adam edged his white mask off the slightest bit. Revealing hairless flesh. Jaundiced. Lumpy. Rot-bitten flesh, monster flesh, human flesh. Jaw nodded solemnly at this. Do you not flinch? He seemed to mature when he said. I'm a Marine. Kid. I've seen people burned alive. Something strangely pleasant welled up in Adam's heart. Changed though Jaw was. Could Adam possibly have been finding common ground with a human? Tears shone in his eyes as he said. Me too. Jaw loosened up and shared. That chap you're with may have told you he seems to know a lot of things he shouldn't, but my time in the service was cut short by a horrific government experiment. Project Rainbow. Top secret. Unable to return home. I joined Shark Society. And lived among them for years. So many years. And then I died. Or, maybe I was a ghost as soon as I fell off that ship. I don't know. The details are as fuzzy as this golly awful flea-mutt face. Besides. I'm Jaw. Not brains. I'm not one o' those science fiction scientists from the black and white movie pictures that were popular before the war. Well. I hope my friends and I can be the next best thing to your old shark pod. Adam held out his hand anew. Perhaps we can be allies. Allies? Said Jaw with a bewildered blink. Hang on, the war's over. Dracula returned with a tray of heaping hamburgers and chomp-worthy cheeseburgers, all for Jaw. As the Marine dug in, Dracula began a spiel about the state of the world. And the rebellion of himself and Adam and the whole big monstrous gang. He explained that though the world was plagued by prejudice, perhaps it was not beyond saving. Jaw listened and nodded as he munched his lunch. He was remarkably calm. But rage bubbled beneath the surface. Rage at his former captors and the aquatic cage. And rage at the devious chefs who, under a deceptively normal burger exterior, had so vastly changed the original recipe. He seemed to follow and believe so far. Now for the twist, they were movie monsters, the likes of which Jaw had likely abhorred from a silver screen. He wanted a human America, if he knew they were irksome ghoulies. Would he finally balk? They were interrupted. However. Doors flung open. And the music. The jazzy sky tunes from the invisible jukebox. Cut off. All customers shushed themselves. Spectated the entrance. And saw an extraordinary werewolf. It was Helen. A daisy fresh pinned in her yellow power suit. Why here? Why now? Drac. Adam. And Jaw stared with all the others. But was there something in them of mortal fear? Stay calm. Everyone. It's just your first lady, Helen said. Suave. Walking coolly in. You may have heard the news, there's a couple of criminals on the loose. They might be hiding in plain sight. There's nothing to be afraid of, just pass this little test. When she had first entered, so too had a werewolf cop and a werewolf priest. And as she talked, the priest filled a styroholophone cup with water. Performed a quick benediction. The first part of the test is a blood test. The cop will prick you and see if you have translucent ghost blood, she explained. Then the priest is going to pass your table with a cup of holy water. Dip your hand in. And if it burns, we know you're a vampire. She examined the crowd's faces, reactions were neutral to positive. For no one was quite holding their breath like the monster table. Helen grinned winningly. Easy? Then Adam barked. Eve. He shot up from his seat. The room was paralyzed. Jaw barked. What the Sam Hill? Adam had thrown his gaze on First Lady Helen. Miraculously, she had paused to return it. And she erased her smile. Made her visage as bare and solid as the mask Adam wore. What had he seen? Was it something in his own mind only? Or something far buried in her eyes? 2 hearts, he said. Stepping away from the table. Nearing her slowly. 2 hearts. Once wedded. Shall never part. 'Twas a promise made before your birth. And tonight I tell thee that. Should you take my hand in thine, ye shall never regret it. He was before Helen now. And took an arrow to the knee. Helen stared down. The affront. The repulsion she began to feel showed not a whit in her bearing. A snicker escaped the cop beside her. Eve, yelped Adam. Are not the clothes we wear deceptive? Mine the cloak. And yours the loupe-ish fur? Why do you not let your full moon crumble? Why must we hide any longer? Tears streamed down his face, he had removed his mask and hat. Gasps rang out. And diners scrambled for the doors. Dracula sat biting his fingernails at the speed of sound. Jaw. Utterly wrapped. Did not eat a ham. The cop grabbed his gun. The priest his squirt gun. But the so-called Eve, like a saint, gestured gently for them to wait. Even with her brave stance, she trembled from head to foot, terrified by Adam's sallow flesh. This is madness, griped the cop. I should have shot him on sight. I know, she said quietly. Her eyes in Adam's unwavering. And this man belongs in maximum security. But he's also an idiot with a code of honor. And he won't strike until he finishes speaking. Indeed. At that same moment he was waxing philosophical about how their love encompassed the beginning and the end of the world. Poor dog, he really believed that Helen's ears stayed trained on him throughout. Call the trucks. The pieces clicked. You know him? Like? Personally? The trucks, she said a notch louder. Alas, roared Adam through crazy tears. Though knowing that thou art at the hip of the president of the world pains me beyond words. Still I do not ask what brought you two together. I dare not ask what cards foul fortune dealt you. I only smile, see these my lips. I smile to find you well. So many centuries on. Hang on, I may brainstorm a sonnet. Helen reared back and wound up her arm. Literally wounded, metal clicks. As if of bolts. Resounded. Then she stepped forward and, in one impeccable movement, knocked Adam's block off. The knuckle fit into his chin, the follow-through lifted both parts together. Helen's fist came back to guard her face while Adam's head soared off. Losing teeth. His body trailed after him. For his block had not quite left it. As the back of Adam's head banged into a burger. his shoulders having fallen upon the table. Dracula and Jaw staggered to their feet but were stopped by caution. A few other customers remained in Webnovel's, filming the odd scene with their finger-sized cameras. Thus far, these two had done nothing that the other remaining visitors would not have. They stopped short because they feared what Helen was capable of. Dracula knew that even if Adam, gone mad, had confused her for another or for a mere fable, no werewolf woman should be able to knock out such a giant in one blow. Adam needed saving. But how much could Dracula do? His strength had been compromised when Jaw engulfed him in a defensive, angry laser that afternoon. And to boot, he had never fully healed from the wounds Alice had inflicted. With his vampire powers thus mightily reduced, he may as well have been an ordinary wolfster. Jaw, on the other hand, saw Helen the captor. He was chomping at the metaphorical bit to rip her shreddentine. Yet stopped himself with a fear not unlike that of a child before the parent. Before sweet bravery found a chance to wrap them in some saving garb. Adam rewoke. But he was not Adam. For Ammoniusare had come. And it was his soul that sun flared from the mummy eyes they shared. The mini-moon burst into less than powder. All along the papyrus wraps, letters sparked as if to catch fire. And their glow, shining beneath the burly coat, was clear to see. And golden hot. Steam billowed fast through collar and sleeve, his body floated upright on a pillar of smoky air. And stood anew. Then the body rose almost to the ceiling, the better to honor the radiant facsimile of a sun upon his head. For there on Adam's skull was a disk, now fierce with daylight. Quite another transformation consumed that head. The old hat transformed into a pharaoh's headdress striped with green and bronze. A royal gold ribbon, appearing from nowhere, wrapped around his goatee, which appeared from nowhere. Finally of all finales, the coarse and decrepit face Adamic shape changed into the head of a man-sized eagle of Egypt. And when his beak opened to issue commandments, tiny vampire fangs were seen therein. Seashore punching, warlike pup. So saith I, the spirit of great Amun-Ra. Scarcely 10 seconds had passed since the god's strange appearance. Yet all in the room were sweating torrents. Such was the power of the fright he inspired and, even more than that, of the warmifying rays from that mock sun o'er his brow. And the heat was getting bolder, and lest we forget the light, Dracula held, spun on his toes, and fainted, all while his skin boiled and roiled. He collapsed, spasming terribly, shedding vaporized skin and steam and droplets. And he fell into the arms of witless Jaw. And he moaned, "OHH. At least I have my shades." And he slid the shades on. But shades could not save him from death. To Jaw, the next move was clear: toss his doughboy helmet back on and get the heck out of Dodge. He charged out the door, past civilians who were themselves nearly flame-broiled by this devilish heat. And as he charged, the weak and delirious Dracula clawed at his saving arms, desperate to stay behind and help Adam some way. Somehow. At least the two drew little attention. Werewolf guests and werewolf employees followed, howling as though at the moon. And the stragglers either tripped or collapsed, striving through new pools of sweat. And speaking of moons, their mini-moons quaked, threatened by mighty soul. The werewolf priest, after flinging the water cup on his face, darted away. The werewolf cop looked jealously on, panting a cacophony. The only victim of Ammoniusare's rays who did not fall nor panic nor sweat even a drop was Helen. "Turn off the heat," she barked. "You're going to kill innocent people. Do not cower behind an excuse," bellowed Ammoniusare, staring straight ahead rather than down on her. "They run. And the weak ones crawl for the exit. No. The light only stops when you can endure no longer." He cackled. And it was an eerie ring. Or shall I cut to the chase and do what my host could never bring himself to do, bruise and batter? Then sup on your flesh. The nutrition of your corpse augmenting my vampiric attributes? He answered his own question by raising his fists, which were encased in twists of papyrus like boxing gloves. It was deadly beauty they bore. The paper had gone blood red while the letters of Vrolok were a golden pulse. Ammonius R.A. As if on wires. Began to descend. Yes. I might shall. Have at thee. MMM. Thwack. Helen. Dauntless. Threw the first punch. And Ammonius R.A. spiraled away. Bits of papyrus fluttering in his wake. But in a second he, puppet-like, righted himself. Though face be dented, he would not be outdone. He jabbed her core. And with a loud crunch of bone, sinew, and networks of blood, sent her reeling over the police. Wolfman's fainted form tripping over it, slamming into the cash register. Ammonius R.A. perplexed. Most peculiar. Mortal bones crunch now? Helen leaped up, darted around him, and swept the legs. Bad move. Ammonius R.A. simply bobbed over the sweep. Now his heat grew oppressive to even her. She knew that the battle needs must end soon, or else she and the cop would melt outright. Then with a shatter of glass, every window of the Wolfwonolds burst asunder, and through them came roaring pellets of rice. Ammonius R.A. paused to chortle, puffing his chest. Ha ha ha. My body is vampire but my mind is God. You think I will. His consciousness was competing for space. The flame in his eyes, and subsequently the flame on his head, flickered out. Oh dear. Oh no. What a mess of rice this is. Then his beak retreated. His paper glow faded. And his ornaments popped out of existence. He was Adam. And he metamorphosed just as if his fire were doused with a traitorous bucket. Sad sight he was now, bending to the floor, pinching kernels of rice while police and hordes came looming above. Helen helped the cop to his feet with an uncertain look. A look that knows the work is far from over. You know him? Said the cop in a weak wheeze. Yeah. He's a jerk. July 4th. 12:30 a.m., the time of Adam's incarceration. As the Wolfwonolds blared with color of flame, there stood the brown house half a mile off, still bright yellow amber in electric light. There stood the National Mall. Grass Sentinel. Vast and shrubby blanket. There stood apartment buildings of all manner of wealthness. Their median income level far greater, or far lesser, than any single income bracket within. Jaw barreled out of the Wolfwonolds, dashed into one of the more sordid alleyways, and tossed Dracula's form onto the irksome ground. For a moment or two, he watched the poor sire flail, skin flaking out from his fur. Ag. Flebelped. Adam. Adam. He's not here. Adam. Vladimir. Jaw slapped him upside the head. This brought Dracula to his senses. Particularly the sense of sight. They were definitely not in a bright burger cafe. Jaw, he said, panting for the excitement and the rush of cold night air were still getting to him. Let me go back. Please. There is still time. At that moment wheel-less police cars sped by, past the lip of the alley. Dracula snarled, rearing up on his forearm. But Jaw stopped him. What a horrible state the vampire was in, besides the peeling skin. His fur was leaving, too, in clumps, so that he really could pass for a burn victim. Such was the darkling curse of ultrasensitive skin. Ah no. You are right, he said, reclining. And soon he was flat on the ground, painfully placid. I am weaker than them. Not even an armada of tiny bats could save us. Wait. Jaw's lips parted. And he raised a finger to them. Pale skin army of bats, Transylvanian accent, Vladimir, he cupped a hand around his mouth. You're Bela Lugosi. In disguise. Jaw paused again. Expressionless. Wait. So vampires versus werewolves, except you're also a werewolf. Hey, he said, furrowing his furry brow. Why do I want to support a vampire world? It is not a vampire world I am fighting to make, but a monster world. Monster? Wait, no. I meant I can still sell this. Huh, said Jaw mildly. Huh. I think that'd be cool. Pops. I mean, not to get all philosophic-y, but I'm kind of a monster. Exactly. I am glad you said it before I did. Now, continued the Drac, buoyed on a current of excitement, if we wish to reunite with our allies, which I hope you do join me in desiring, we will need to access a phone. I believe the phone booth might still exist, but I have not found one as of yet. He was beginning to hesitate anew. On second thought, maybe we could ask. Jaw hollered, poking his head out from the alley. Any of you cats know? Cats? Several werewolves threw their rocks and purses at him. He came back in unglory. Round his mini-moon one could practically see the stars and birds twirling about his bruisings. I am sorry you had to experience the Dracula interrupted himself with a snap of the fingers. That is right. They use cell phones. Go again, he said, waving Jaw on. Ask for a cell phone. And do not call them cats. Jaw nodded, brisk and obedient as a timely order of iced tea, and scurried back out. The moment he said cell in no particular direction, a werewolf stepped off their moving sidewalk and declared themselves happy to oblige. Jaw had not expected such a quick return of grace. He gesticulated. It'll only be a moment. Sir, ma'am, Oh. No problem. I got several. Just keep it. The werewolf made what Jaw supposed to be a placating patacake gesture, laying both paws briefly atop Jaw's. Then, without apparently having given a thing, the werewolves slotted themselves back into the sidewalk line, and returned their gaze to such a holoscreen as perplexed his ancient mind. Jaw walked back to Dracula, swinging his arms with an abandon that said, I give up. How was it? Said Dracula. Well, cell phone is right. Do you have it? Yeah. But it was so small I either crushed it or dropped it. Dracula shifted aboard his 2 feet. Perhaps I should get one. And use my heightened vampire senses to deftly wield. Nah. Pops. Not unless you want folks sending you to the hospital. He gave a great brown yawn. Permission to give up? Part of Dracula wished to utter a nasty cuss. Permission granted, he allowed. It would not have been a sound idea to use Jaw's powers to fly to Alice's abode. Invisible they may become, but moving crazedly through NYDC streets, for they had not the address of the place, nor the slightest intuitive notion of this city's geography, would leave a streak of misplaced smell throughout the city, one leading suspiciously like a string to the Minotaur to the place they sought. So the 2 combat survivors instead spent the night laying low, in an anxious state that would not allow much sleep, as they invisibilified and rose to an apartment building's flat rooftop. They came within sight of the National Mall. Dracula and Jaw began to swap stories of war, an act which came quite naturally to them, like the final flower blooming of a long and fateful night. Bittersweet laughs, losses of friends, and illusory triumph, and lest they forget the war wounds physical and mental, the hanger-on nightmares of evil and, worse, of uncertainty. Adam was as good as a ghost. That was not to say he was lost to Dracula, in fact. The pale fiend in lupin form had every hope of finding him. In shape more or less. and that his friend the mummy might at length fight a way out. If Adam had been carted to prison, then Dracula would find that prison after the alien descent. Time could not be lost there. Not even for friends in need. But when I say he was a ghost, I mean that the heavier that Werpire's eyes became, the more powerfully Adam haunted him. Fears of Adam's fate mingled with the happy times, like swirls of bitter coffee in milk. And the brown house was their backdrop, standing tall like a trophy. The sun rose and lit it like a lamp. It was bronze like a treasure unattainable, bronze like an amazing hope. As the sun came up, its beams passing through their invisible forms, Dracula and Jaw remained watchful, silent, vigilant. Dawn rose today, and the brown house opened its doors, and the lawn appeared to have groomed itself. Grass, fresh cut, like hairs that glisten with the dew of lotion after a turn in the spirited barber's chair, invited 4 werewolf feet. Since the house had just opened, the lawn was nigh empty and perfectly unsuspecting. It gave the senior werewolf the feeling that Igor, rather than dismissing him, had forgotten him completely. He led the way in something between tourist garb and ragged dumpster clothes, keeping his shades, yearning for sunscreen. His fur remained blotchy from prior burns, and even from gentle modern burns. But he and Jaw could work with that. His companion had on his own dumpster fashion, plus a dumpster backpack, into which he had squirreled the trademark helmet that might have otherwise given him away. They were going to try their luck. As they neared the wide-open doors, felt the pomp of a happily ending story. Preemptive relief washed over them. The doorway was edged with guards, so the 2 visitors stopped. The guards wrinkled their noses at their povertacious trash smell, but they fancied themselves progressive. The 4 exchanged respectful salutes. "Good morning, fellow wolves. Officer Pupster here. We're gonna have to do a pat-down and some anti-vampire stuff before we let Jaw in. Is that all right?" Jaw nodded, but his companion only cleared his throat. Again and again. Louder and louder. Increasing in gravity, until he could speak his accent gone French. "My fellow country wolves," he said. "Something has gone terribly wrong. There's been a mix-up. Someone swapped me out with a false Igor. Why couldn't it be true? Their height and weight were just alike. Their voices near enough. Everyone alike was werewolf and alike imposter." Surprised silence. Then a laugh from Pupster. A sneer from her coworker gruffly. And the knowledge, now seating itself in Dracula, that they did not believe this bluff for an instant. So he had to play it up. He growled, "Well, prove I'm not." Gruffly dialed something on his wrist communicator while Pupster pointed at Jaw. "Then who's that guy?" Jaw said. "Arp? Nobody. He's the zoo animal. Surprisingly docile. Dracula." "Yeah. We had a run-in," sighed Dracula, biting his lip. "Take him away. Now," he added with a shove of the war vet, making a show of impatience. Jaw stood ignored. "And get me to my office. Now." "Hello, Mr. President," said gruffly into his communicator. Some gentle din came from the watch, a background conversation. Even a werewolf vampire could not decipher it. But he could tell that its mood verged on the festive. "Sir, we have a minor situation." "SHH," came the reply like a bomb. Igor whisper snarled. "Not now. Shut this off. Wait until the landing." Aroo. Dracula tried for a second to register the room's acoustics. Was that a flaw in the communicator's design? Or a slight echo backing Igor's words, indicating a larger space? He filed this hunch away. He turned to the officers then. with a shake of the head and a couple of nostrilous flares. To think you would let Dracula worm his way into my brown house like that. Ruining our first meeting with alien life. Gimme that. He snatched at Gruffly's wristman, hoping to tear it off. But instead he tugged the entire officer and his hairy hand up to his own sniffer. Undeterred, he stubbornly hell-breathed. I will find you and put you on trial. Sir. You get down here this instant. What? Who is this? The president. And he hung up the phone only because it was a paw. He threw an entire officer onto the floor and barely noticed. He was fuming now. Half-bent. A linebacker whose enemy line stood tantalizingly close. Oh. But he had forgotten part of his alibi. I sure miss Helen, he said with a tiny yet evocative sniffle. And he conspicuously pulled out a clump of neck hair. I have been missing her all night. Ah, said both the collapsed and the standing officer sympathetically. How sweet. Sir. That's Mr. President to you. A strange object flew into Dracula's face then. It was the first attack of the day. If one could call it an attack. Any ordinary werewolf would have accepted the blow, welcomed it. Really even opened their mouth and caught the projectile. But a vampire could never act this way with garlic. No. His gut. His sweatened brow. And his entire being commanded him to swat the thing away. And to hiss as though his vocal cords had combined with his intestines to form an entire snake. Away went the garlic, and the hairless patches on his hand told a tale of their own. They burned now. The officers could see. Not literally. The skin had been most irritated. The officers looked at each other. And Dracula stood taxidermy still, and jaw stood ignored. Then Pupster and Gruffly stepped a ways away, keeping one eye on the two visitors. They whisper debated with one another. The vampire's sensitive ears could pick up the occasional Igor or no. Stupid. That's Dracula. He watched them with a mask of anger, feeling simultaneously hopeful and low, as though a lump of wet gruel, theoretically enriching, were sliding sickeningly into the cockles and coccyges of his heart. Either this was when the hard part began, or Gruffly attended to jaw, and Pupster turned to Dracula with a cough. There might indeed be a mix-up. Mr. President. Sir. Dracula thrilled. Though he knew this may be faint, his heart's gruel became spicy grits. She led him through the lobby, grand and many picture-framed, and into a far tinier door. Black. Discreet. Unlabeled. Just before they bumped into it, a hyperspeed iris scanner lanced Pupster's eye and the door swished mechanistically open, revealing a sterile corridor of the blandest white steel holochromine. Onward toward the interrogation room. Hold on. I can't believe this. Officer Pupster, he said hotly. I don't have time for this. The ship lands in. What? 5 or 6 hours? That's right. Mr. President. 8 tonight, said Pupster pleasantly enough. But he was forced to stop by his own powerful wince. This corridor was shot straight through with a perilous pungence, essential oil of garlic. Yerf. I don't care how long you've worked for me. You're getting sued for this. It's just a smell, it won't exactly hurt you. And with all due respect. You said it yourself, take no chances. At their door was a more ominous officer by far. He was a SWAT type. Outwardly not unlike those guards Dracula and Adam had faced at Giza. Complete with riot shield and laser gun at the ready. But Dracula could see that his belt was far fuller, with a more diverse, targeted array. He could guess what was inside: a nail gun, ready to stake the heart, blasters of holy water and hellfire, plenty of rice, beans, and other dry goods, and whatever ghosts hated. A video camera? It was this super-ready officer who bid them welcome and opened the interrogation room door. Pupster and Dracula were seated at a white table. Besides a small air vent and cameras in every corner, the room was spotless, dentless, and alternate openingless. Mr. President, if you could sit still. Sir. The nerve. The sheer nerve. This is the most important night of our lives, and, sir, the faster we get this done. My name is Igor. I've never known my birthday. But it was around July 7th, 1921. My favorite color's purple, but a duller shade of it that resembles the underside of autumn leaves. You might not know that part. Ask Helen. We will. Mr. President. Can you tell me what's inside your desk? Dracula blinked. Was this officer a true junior? One who had not been around when he ransacked Igor's desk in that office of oval repute? He remembered that desk well. He had quite the memory for the accoutrements of friends for such sentimental things. But, more than likely, Igor had rearranged or even replaced the objects in his new or rebuilt desk. Dracula's next words would likely be recognized as a bluff. In the corner right about here, he said with a pantomime, his hand hovering over an imagined drawer, there's a purple velvet box. And if you look inside, there's a tiny silver cross. They found it around my neck when I was a baby, and I've never been able to leave it since. As Dracula said this, he felt an unexpected choking up ready to rear its head, but he pushed it back just as it attempted to tighten the throat. He was beginning to remember Igor. And this cross memento seemed, as it never had before, like a little lodestone on his old friend's weary hands. Well, Mr. President, said Pupster jollily, you've passed the test. Dracula felt tricked. Ha, he said. A sarcastic laugh. Not that fast. No. I'm serious. No, you're not. Not until you get Helen down here. Pupster had frozen. Something in the air had changed. Nothing physical. Nothing scientifically detectable. Nothing phenomenal. Dracula sniffed. As if one could sense a paradigm shift. He asked in his own voice. What gave it away? The walls became solar lamps. Every surface blazed with sheer white light, growing in intensity every moment. And just as Pupster slipped out the door, Dracula's mini-moon, like porcelain, shattered. He shattered, too. Sprawling on the floor. All but crumbling. Baking in the heat. Incredible work. Team. Needs to go off without a hitch. Just one chance at utopia. If you were a Brown House employee with top-level clearance, you would have access to its topmost secreted tomb of science. And to these the murmurs of the scientists. As in a darkroom. The lights were low, only the vaguest shine played on the rims of test tubes. On chemical lips. In the center. Over a microscope and an impressive bacterial sample. The excited science wolves stood huddled. In their midst were Igor. A scientist in his own right. And Helen. Not a scientist. The president had a grand smile and intermittently rubbed his hands together. He and the first lady were a study of contrasts. She had one arm threaded through his. And a weary, dragged look. The night before had come with ups and downs for Helen especially. Igor had seen her distress. Heard her out. And yet, today, was all business and teeth. You're sure you combined the two strains, without a hitch, said Igor. A nervous werewolf. Smothering jitters in planetary patriotism. Said. As sure as the future of Earth is on the line. Here we have Type B. The short-timed release. Plus the more gradual Type C. Yes. Yes. I studied this all once upon a time. You know. Of course. Sir. Of course. You'll disinfect your hands. But slip the serum on afterward. You've been practicing your sleight of hand? Yes. Yes. I was a street magician once upon a time. You know. Well. Of course. I read your autobiography. Anywho. The serum gets airborne and infects the whole ship. Timed release of 24 hours? 24 hours. Sir. Then why does this petri dish say 26? An audible gulp. Wheel. Produce one final strain. Sir. Good. Good. While this nervy scientist trudged off with the sample and the other scientists held their breath, the world president seemed remarkably unconcerned. Unhurried. He folded his hands before him. Helen, with her free hand, checked her wrist communicator. Then Igor became grandiose. Soon after the visit of the alien ambassadors, their ship will turn back, passing through the resplendent rays of the moon. He licked his authoritative chops over that word, moon, when exposed to those rays. They will understand the amazing feeling of being a werewolf and accept it far quicker than humanity did. Then, 13 days later, when they reach their home planet, Type C will kick in, initiating the serial biting disease. Thanks to satellite pictures of the Flutoidan surface, they could just about picture it. Insectoid ambassadors launched into fits, infecting their entire world before the werewolf virus could be combated. As years wore by, werewolfism would, in a sense, terraform Flutoid, for Earth would teach the aliens how to wear away the mighty canyons of their own moons, how to realize their own werewolf society. They'll all be werewolves by Christmas. By Christmas, said a researcher thoughtfully. What a symbolically relevant holiday. Earth'll be getting the biggest and best present of all, real, identical friends. Bark bark. Another added. I haven't gotten a present in years. You know. I was alive in the year without a Santa, Igor said, his voice gone grizzled. We had tough times leading up to it. Awfully tough. But you know, that Christmas it was a kind of Independence Day. We no longer rely on Santa for presents, just our own Lupinian selves. That year you made the North Pole werewolf demands, said the nervy werewolf, shuffling back in with a new petri dish. The nostalgia he was manufacturing touched the heartbobs. Who else was gonna make Santa stand up for werewolf rights? No one. Take any storefront in 2305, continued Igor, who now stared into the distance. Helen stared at the floor. See the Santa in the window. Is he a werewolf? No. His voice dropped to a whisper as he said. He never was. To be a little cheesy with you guys, said the thoughtful researcher. My head is still spinning from the good job you've done with werewolf reform. Just in the past 40 years, we've moved from a 95% to a 99.999% werewolves to humans majority. When I was young, my hometown was really rather poor, so everyone there was still a human. In grade school, bigger kids and more beautiful kids used to make fun of me for the way I was. And I couldn't help it. It was just how I was born. But once you made the werewolf procedures mandatory and free for most anyone in the world, and everyone became the same, all of the bullying stopped. With great daring, he clasped Igor's hands. This plan of yours might be controversial. I know more than anyone how mad some of my neighbors and relatives will be when word gets out. But I just wanted to say, out loud, that I believe in this with all my heart. His hand slipped away, he faltered. I mean, what could we do if the aliens came down and started making fun of us for being werewolves? Like, what else be we got after that? Right? Honestly, I'd do something horrible to myself, said another. Igor reassured them. Worst comes to worst, I'll be impeached after a few hundred more years in office. But what you've all helped me to do will pay off someday. Even in your own lifetimes. I'll certainly be there to see an entire second planet full of werewolves living and learning in harmony. Maybe even a third one. Someone raised a petri dish in lieu of a sloshing cup. To a universe without prejudice. Here. Here. The bunch grabbed dishes and clinked them against one another, laughing all the while. Even a brief interruption from the brown house's front gate could not mar the cheer of Igor and his science squad for long. Only Helen stayed stoic. Did not grab anything at all, but kept her hand around his arm. And in between his rowdy laughs, Helen whispered in his ear. "Can we have some privacy?" He whispered back. "Again?" She sighed heavily. She remembered the softer man he used to be. Then she checked her wrist communicator again. Not because it created any phonic rings or vibrations signaling news. But because she was anxious, no. Beyond anxious, haunted. In a few minutes, the scientists cleared out. Helen and Igor were alone in near darkness. Facing each other. "What is it?" "Helen?" "I'm scared," she said. "That's all there is to it." "What have you got to be scared of? Your ex is behind bars. And if anything does happen, you'll be the first to know. And anyway," he said with a chuckle, "I watched the videos. I forgot you were so good. You know. So strong." His grin of encouragement did nothing for her. "You're so dour." Should she not have known better? Igor had long since passed the point of wise compassion. She was aware of this. What had won her over were his ideals, world-spanning, world-changing. Incredible because they were real. Now, centuries on, he was nothing but his ideals. He was a bundle of strategies meant to keep the ideals going. An iota of charisma and many practiced gestures. She really had married a concept. It was funny. Maybe, cyborg though she was, she had not intended to marry an automaton. A hand flew to her face, her cuff. Fast as light. Catching a tear. Igor flinched. The reason he flinched was not because his understanding of human emotion had degenerated so far as to make him incapable of comforting people, although, I mean, that's true enough, but because if her tear duct secretions reached the wrong wire in her face, it would mean a small explosion. "Sorry," she said, rubbing roughly. "Guess I shouldn't have started charging before you came in here." She finished just as a buzz trilled from her wrist communicator. Igor latched onto this as a smoother way to cap the conversation. "Sounds like you have news," he said. Helen nodded. "You'd better get to it." She unthreaded her arm from his, retreated into the further darkness of the room, and brought watch to face. The entire world was dark. No. That was just the back of Adam's eyelids. They peeled open to reveal a dark world. Adam sat up on the concrete floor and dazedly gazed around. Bars before him. Striped clothes about him. Solid wall behind him. And to his left a scraggly old man scooping the air with a spoon and grinning at his new cellmate. "Where in blazes am I?" I ask. "And has some foul Luciferus being stolen away this very atom from Edenic freedom?" Adam asked. "Where? My fellow man. Where?" "You're in the most protected prison in th whole world," the oldster giggled. "Under the brown house." By degrees Adam awareness of his surroundings beyond the cell. There was a rumble as constant as summer cicadas. Grim and raucous. He observed a second floor that was somewhat visible. And sundry cells in full view. Some small. Others quite large. Adam began with a cough and a swallow. "What sorts of prisoners inhabit this accursed dwelling?" "Nothin' but the most infamous crooks of all time." "Looky there." The old man jabbed the spoon toward a smaller cell containing two other humans. One sullen and burly. The other chipper and talking to himself. "That's a circus strongman." Part of an illegal sideshow, capitalism on non-werewolves. Then there's that one talkin' to himself. He didn't get the treatment either, and he might also be a little bit psycho. I presume, Adam preemptively summed, that you three refused to be werewolfinized. The old prospector type nodded vigorously. We all refused it. Me and you and the birds and the rest. The birds? Adam gasped. Yes indeedy, said the codger. And he motioned toward a cell with tighter bars holding many severals of birds. While the majority fluttered about in a crazy cloud, two stood austerely at the bottom. The falcon of Malta, the coot informed. Tried to give it to him, he always bit back. So'd that raven. All those birds flying around. They're worse. I heard. He delighted. Of course. In that word worse. Nice coastal town got the treatment some years ago. Next thing you know, these birds try and peck their eyes out. I say. Good on 'em. This sudden holler got the birds to squawking. They must have been flattered. Other prisoners screamed, hey, and shut it. Nevermore, quoth the raven. He truly was one of the greatest villains in literary history. But there was a greater villain behind these bars, the primordial villain of cinematic history. That was the specimen in the ginnermiest cell Adam could see. Who rose to the ceiling even of that? Steer your eyes to that cell, guided the old man. He sounded reverent when he said. The Great Train. A steam engine from the late 19th century. To Adam's eyes. Untutored in the tech of the future present. Much less the past perfect. It was hard to comprehend. It had wheels like the strange steed automobile. And that he could see if he twisted his neck. But why the conical hat, for he had no word for smokestack? Most of all. Why? Why imprison an unthinking machine? As soon as that thought entered his mind, the pistons began to pump. A slow and mounting chug, chug, accompanied by a waft of smoke echoed throughout the compound. Prisoners, all attentive, dropped their voices, peered round cells and edges. The train moved forward, chugga 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 chugga, inching closer to the prison bars. If it broke through and chugged much farther, it had a chance of veering sideways to hit Adam and the old fellow's cell. Yet Adam's companion seemed unchanged in character. Merely yelling affectionate. Ah! The fool! Metal behemoth! It puffed. It rolled. It chunked along. It smashed into the bars. It reeled. The train bumped with a loud caroning against the iron. And bounced backward, not only backward, but upward. As the great train had boxcars attached. The front went belly up, reverberating with the prison bar twang, while the rest stayed idle. That is, until the front collapsed onto its side, sending the boxcars and their contents, bags of 1900s money with 1900s money written on them, spilling across the cell. There had been a whoop of excitement when train and bars collided. But now the prisoners fell back into business as usual. The only changes were the smoking train heap, its spinning wheels, and the footsteps of guards issuing from down the hall. Light steps with distinctive clicks, as of chitinous boot heels. Adam moved to speak, but was suddenly jolted by a pang in his head. He groaned, cradled his head in his hands, and dove into the corner. Ugh! Kind sir, he exclaimed. Surely you guessed this, but I may be a little bit psycho myself. Shall we say? While I was unconscious. Did I sleepwalk? Did I wreak any? Did you suffer? Nah. Nothin' much, said the winter chicken. He paused. 'Cept you talked to yourself. A lot. He snickered wildly. Small comfort. It appears I must endure far more than the loss of the Count. The Count? The beaming face twinkled with recognition. Adam gawked indeed. He gibble-gab-gobble-gobble-gawked to see that the man mayhaps, knew more than he let on. He covered his gawking with one hand and said mock casually, "Why? Yes. Count Dracula." "Oh," said the old man. He ceased twinkling. "Don't know that count." He had been idle for too long. His scoop in hand twitched until Adam gave him leave to knead the air with his spoon. In this way Adam permitted himself peace. Peace such as it was. Full 43 voices populated his head. He now realized that since the conclusion of the baptism of blood, either those voices or his ability to discern them had been amplified. And now that amplitude had reached a fever pitch, he could even scry from whence each voice came. One was saying, "Cripes, but it's dark in here. Wish this bloke Adam had body bucks or somethin' 'cause I'm workin' overtime." "What? The right eye?" Another maligned. "Poor train. Had a fightin' chance." "What? The pair of kidneys?" Why kidneys cared for the fate of some train was beyond Adam. The hand that cradled his face moaned loudly. Eve. Eve. For it had held her gingerly all those years ago. And the deepest concern of its life even in this confounding prison was why she had betrayed the great composite that was Adam. But had she and the First Lady been one and the same? Were his instincts right? Well, easier to believe that his time at the Wolfwonolds was mere hallucination. Sad madness. Still another voice, a stronger one than most, cried, "Alack! We must be free." That was his own heart. The dominant order under which all other opinions bickered and eventually knocked themselves into line. Usually, the big boss, so to speak. His most coriest self. But the oddest voice by far seemed to come from a place above, from a sun that hovered before his eyes. In the exact center of his vision. It was invisible. Of course. It was all in his head. But when he focused on it, it reacted and materialized in his mind's eye. And like a static and intangible mini-moon it hung in his vision and, when he closed his peeper lids, in the resultant black rose hue. None other than ammonius ra. "Far be it from me to bother about such things," he was booming. "What be a train to the might of the sun? Ha! Ha! Ha!" Adam's heart, by an effort of will and fortitude, quelled the 41 voices of his other body parts and communed with the inner sun. He, the heart, spoke. "Magnificent sun," he postured. "Life-giving light," he added doubtfully. "Lend me your strength," he added courageously. "For if I perish in this prison, so do you." "But what be a prison to the might of the sun?" he rejoindered stupidly. Ha! 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 Adam recalled every detail of the confrontation with Eve, save her real name. For it had gone unsaid. He knew that pain to his body was pain to the solar soul. So he clamped his teeth down on his hand. So hard that he drew a spot of blood. And got a rise out of every bodily voice. "Ouch," said the right eye. "Ouch," said the left. "Ouch," said the pair of kidneys, the remaining excretory system, the pancreas, the left lung, the right lung, 90% of the skull, the remaining 10%, the right arm excepting one pinky, the arch of the right foot, which had once belonged to a semi-famous serial killer, the toenails, the right earlobe, the cartilage of the ears, the useless flap of skin between the ring and middle fingers of his right hand, the dewlap, 65% of the brain, 35% of the brain plus an extraneous bone that Victor Frankenstein had mistakenly inserted by his elbow, a dropped-in turkey bone, the abdominal muscles, the system of papyrus which had essentially merged with his body, the eyebrow hairs, which had come as a piece from Dr. Schneider, Victor's most despised university professor, and all the rest of the body parts one did not mention. So too did his own heart gasp with the pain. And so did the not-so-distant ammonius ra. "Ouch," said the heart. "OUCH," boomed that sun. We are in agreement about one thing, the bond of blood, decreed Adam Hart. That reminds me, said the stomach. I'm hungry. Quiet. You, rumbled the turkey bone. Adam proceeded. I respect you. Ammonius R.A. You may recall I even prayed to you. The sun set on Walter Whipple. It need not set for us. Bequeath your strength. Which is the light. I beg of you. I am always here. Silly Adam. Watching and waiting. When you are in dire need. Oh. Come on, said 35% of the brain. The part which included the cerebral cortex and most of Adam's snooty side. We need to break out now. You will make no demands of deities. You have intellect. You have reason. Possibilities all around you, and you give up before you have even begun. Pfeh. It is not like that, the heart spluttered. The idea came to me. And, well, I reckoned I would try. Ammonius R.A.'s voice like thunder admonished him. The sun was not real. And yet it grew hotter, sweat pipped on Adam's brow. The mighty R.A. is more than just a whim. Ammonius R.A. cackled. But Adam only buckled. Suffering in a bout of psychosomatic heatstroke, and feeling defeated. Only after several minutes of piteous whines. And drenching sweat. And the encouragement of all the various body parts which were sympathetic to his cause. Did Adam start to recover. The old man was of no help, turned away. He shoveled the sky. Unawares. Nothing on earth could be of help besides Adam's own strength of will. His own conviction. Which Ammonius R.A. had overcast with doubt. But there were bars in the prison. Bars which could be broken. There were guards with their clicking feet. Guards who could be persuaded. There were pipes in the prison. For maximum security had not taken away sinks with running water. There were vents. Not in the cells, but surely somewhere. For the prison had to circulate air somehow. And there were cameras so hidden. However, that no one at all but the warden knew of their existence. Let alone their locations. The prison, as attentive readers know, was under NYDC's Brown House. Subterranean. So was the office of the warden, which sat on a floor directly above. This lone law enforcer worked from a desk lit only by sprawling panes of security screens and the blue glare tossed by his glistering eyes. He drank not water. Only oil. Observing the back wall, one would think him immortal. For it was clogged with minuscule portraits of a certain employee of the month dating back hundreds of years. Always the same face. Bordered by frames of changing materials through the years, wood. Gold. Platinum. Moonrock. Luminous holofoil. The face, too, was material. Made of pure gold. In aspect equal parts robotic and skeletal. His mouth, because it suited a skull, was in perpetual grimace. Suitable visage for a robot whose original purpose was simply to terminate. For his name was the Terminating Robot. His whole name had been the Terminating Robot from the future before he passed the date on which he was originally sent back in time 5 months ago. He had successfully changed the bent of his timeline so that the artificially intelligent villain conglomerate that created him was never made. He often asked himself, is this future which I have made possible really any better? The answer was a tentative yes. He set his drink down beside a photo more important than any employer-given accolade. The face of the woman he was once assigned to kill, Lara Persons. A human face. At least in this photo. Oil had splashed on his ring-bearing finger, he handkerchiefed it clean. And then his heart, if one believes he had a heart, grew longful. The Terminating Robot stared at the 20-odd computer monitors. Screens of hard plastic. Swarming over the center of his desk. Which had its own array of complex engadgetronics. He was valued. but not valued enough to be granted holographic shimmer screens, another small proof that the Brown house needed him. But did not want him. He was full robot. And therefore non-werewolfable. And 2. His very body comprised deadly technology that the present could not decipher, much less replicate. Had he known that Helen was mostly robot, with metal augments constituting all but her brain and central nervous system, the body's command center and its highways of blood, he would have realized why she showed him mild courtesy, coming down to this dungeon herself to bring him weekly oil cans. Today they were linked. Her wrist communicator to a channel on his intercom, the newest prisoner made her very, very nervous. He flicked a digit. 5 screens out of 25 showed Adam. From various angles. He was up against the wall and keeping himself rigid in roughly the same posture as the Thinker, a famous sculpture which, coincidentally, was also sitting behind bars in that very same prison on account of its inability to werewolfinize. No news is good news. Said the robot to himself. And he sipped a strawful of oil. A little red light on his massive console of gadgets began to beep. Signal for a busted water line. He groaned. With a lazy keystroke, he dialed Helen's wrist via the intercom. Hello. Madam. Water line break. No. It's not nothing, you told me to report any yes. I'm sending somebody. Check on Frank? He rolled his beady robo-eyes. Okay. Better safe than sorry. Bye. So he sent grunt rank guards every which way or 2 which ways, one party to the water, the other to rough up Adam for roughing up's own sake. What was the strange thing that the terminating robot had just strangled? Odd foe. It was the paper that had come rambling up through the ventilation system. What was it, a snake? What moved it, for it was not flesh and blood, but paper? And whence had come the eyeball that made the snake's flimsy head? Who had infiltrated this office who doubted the future robot's power? As soon as he heard it rustling in the grate, the terminating robot, with an oil can open and fresh in his hand, had closed in on it, lickety-split, and stomped the eyeball hyper-fast with his shiny metal boothiel. Now the bloodstain, the eye goop, and that withered, pitiful stalk of thin paper sat together on the grate, trickling back down into prison. At the same time, Adam gave a grunt. This grunt was played in stereo. 5 screens among the 25 screamed. Jaya Ergurg. But let us back up. Just a minute before, the terminating robot had sent out his guards. Some to the prison's broken water line, others to Adam's cell. Thereby came the chitinous clicks of velociraptor heels. For came to Adam, wide-eyed and skinny-tailed, and they ambled like killers. Mouths so potent with death as edge, they seemed full of pencils. They came to the cell and stared inside like cats that were not cats. But Adam had simply sat against the wall, looking preeminently thoughtful. A faint reddish-golden glow issued from him, or was that just the imagination of the dinosaurs, combined with the differences in dinosaur eyes as compared to human eyes, which might have allowed them to see infrared? The old man, sitting cross-legged with his face to the wall, had been churning the air, as usual, with his spoon. He turned to nod gregariously. Let him be. Got a lot to think about. After a brief chorus of dino roars, a decision was made. The raptors tossed rocks at Adam. They bounced off, as off bronze. And he did not budge. He did not so much as open his eyes. And the terminating robot, watching this, had commanded, try harder. The cell had clanged open. To prisoners who thirsted for freedom, that harsh jangle was almost a jingle, a potentially friendly thing. Simple, open and shut. And though the bars were strong, they were so small, Such a slight barrier between them and the world. The door was opened. And closed. And yet neither the Spoona man nor the mummy one had budged. All that had changed was the presence. Added. Of the raptors. Before Adam then were the ravenous guards, behind him was the wall. He had sat there thinker-like. And the prisoners had held their breath. They were familiar with the raptor guards' performance. The way they started with spittled roars blared into an inmate's face. And then, without ceremony, kicked. They just kicked. They kicked him in the gut. They kicked and kicked with chitinous ticks. And the fire of Adam's blood leaped and licked. His flesh burned and screamed, and he remained static. I know not what was going through Adam's 43 minds. But I do know this, he was wholly disappointed. It would take a lot more than raptor stomps to get a rise out of him, in fact. It would take a robot stomp. Behind his back was a secret tunnel, through which his papyrus had drilled and wound in secret. Into the warden's office it had appeared then and been crushed, and with a scream. One curdled as the blood of his squashy eye. He announced boldly to the world squealk. Jaya Ergurg. And this disturbed the terminating robot. How had that eye stalk drilled through the walls without him noticing? After all, he was a hypersensitive, alternate recent past robot. Able to detect the slightest disturbance. The taps and thumps. And the slightest change in prison talk. He blamed Helen and her distraction. The aggravation of daily life far underground in the 31st century equivalent of a salt mine. The terminating robot. Disbelieving. Spat oil at the screens. He cursed. Stomped. Wiped them clean. Blast, he yelled. How much oil do they think I got down here? He reached down below his desk into an incredibly long, incredibly wide refrigerator. He grabbed one of the remaining 20,084 cans inside and slammed it onto his desk. He cracked open the tab. Gave it the once-over. And realized he did not want this. That the last thing he wanted to do was relax and calm down. No. He would train his eyes. Blue electric storms. On the monitors. Alice pinched a SWAT guard in the back of the neck. He did not fall. In fact, he hardly felt it. And began to casually rub his neck with a slow-witted. Huh? Straight away Alice leaped off of the neck. And onto an invisible bat pre-swaddled in garlic scent and reader. If this scene does confuse you, remind yourself that Alice could become tiny. And realize, with a relieved sigh, that this writer has not lost their mind. And the former commander had merely eaten the eat-me. So had Robert, who was riding on the same bat's back. They rode Bistrits with the approximate proportions of human riders on horseback, albeit with a big pointy castle in place of a saddle. Meaning that they had to sit delicately. Shoot, Alice Cuss whispered as she hopped aboard. Thought that would do it. Really? Really? Now? With such small and weaksome fingers? Robert was annoyed at the very notion. He tossed her a laser rifle. And of course, Alice thought he was being polite. Not brusque. A moment later, 3 security cameras in that steel holochromine corridor picked up a line of phantom light that struck a werewolf in the jugular vein, when the SWAT guard fell. A host of red lights and sirens went off, drenching the world in warning sensation. They had to get out. Fast. But first that door. The door he had been guarding. Robert. Alice. And the great steed Bistrits had no actual proof that their own Dracula was writhing inside. They were merely combing the area. Peering through the windows and cracks in doors. Sweeping the kitchen. The dining room. The other 3 dining rooms. And the main hall, and now this conspicuously important corridor. It had given them a hunch. They intuited that it might contain an Igor. A Dracula. Or even both, and finding either one would suit their mission. Also, perhaps it contained a black cat. This was all touch and go, which frustrated them both. As if the brown house were rubbing its paw all over the careful chessboard, seeing the destruction of their well-planned thoughts and laughing all the while. Some relief came, however, in the form of direction. An armored guard at a door whose window was so harsh with sunlight that looking inside was impossible, the deadest of giveaways. As soon as that guard hit the floor, however, 6 more dashed in so quickly that they might as well have teleported and, considering the future and all, they may well have. They aimed precisely at Bistrit's spot and let loose. A machine gun rattled off a full magazine, but its bullets only pierced the wall. One lobbed a bomb of ice. One lobbed a bomb of water, only to hit each other, forming a midair crystal that captured nobody. A barrage of crosses, stakes, and rices clashed against each other. None to any avail. Bistritz could fly faster than those guards with his eyes closed. Literally in his sleep. With an involuntary squeak, he plunged daringly into the door's glass window. Before he splattered deplorably cross, Robert and Alice aimed laser guns at the thing and blasted it apart. They and the bat passed through a shimmering rain, which did create some minor cuts, but nothing too major. The artificial sunlight overwhelmed the red hallway, that is, the chunk of it where the guards had concentrated. After the collective and instinctual ugh. My eyes. My moon. My moon, they remembered that their mini-moons, like themselves, were donning little helmets with little protective visors. Those rocks, along with their own puppyish forms, had therefore nothing to be afraid of. So they set foot into that heat-white room, where Dracula was sunning himself against his will. Bistritz flapped beside the door and, seeing his suffering friend, stifled a cry of relief and sorrow. The sun's rays passed harmless through his own transparent form, but sunlight trapped itself in vampire flesh, coaxing it to burn, drawing out, with smoky fingers, the makings of inferno, as if to say, if no mortal foe can bring your sort to hell, then I, Prometheus, will take it to you. But no fires had broken out on Dracula's oh no. It was starting. Alice pondered. Although less than a second had elapsed since Bistritz flew them into this sun trap, she was a speedy ponderer. Maybe if we. No time, said Robert. And he was right. For their initial hope had been to shrink Dracula and take him aboard the same bat. Eek eek, he said to Bistritz. And they U-turned. Hearts heavy with uncircumventable regret. They fluttered away. Their world changed from white to red, 2. Then 5. Then 20 more guards passed below them, flooding into that much-changed interrogation room. Alice had come up with a plan. Maybe we can help Dracula if we hang around outside. Ream. 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 The sirens were growing louder, less forgiving to their ears. Bistritz could not smother his initial cry of pain. Eek. I guess not, she said, and briefly massaged his super keen, ultrasound-sensitive ears. The longer they stayed here, the louder and more intolerable those blasted noise blasters would become. Well, Robert allowed. At least that leaves the security a little uneven. Last I heard, Alice informed, the Brown House SWAT count for today's landing was about 5,000. He sighed. Oh. Geez. Listen, said Alice as Bistritz turned a corner, swinging even closer toward the Brown House's heart. I know we didn't have enough time to save Dracula, but he'll use those guards, he'll find a way. I think he's strong enough, Robert pitched in, with perfect faith. But I figured that if I didn't suggest that there was a way, it would be kind of strange. Since, as you know, he's our ally. Yes. I know, he narrowed his eyes at her. Though she could not see them. And if I went? Yes. Leave him, you might think I was leaving him to die. Which, I thought, is sort of what the enemy would do. Look, Alice. It's just now dawning on me that you don't really understand sarcasm and that maybe I should clear that up. And he sighed again. But it was a sigh of a different color. Maybe I'd been the bad guy. Excuse me? He was not sure at first whether Alice was affronted or struck with a healing bolt of realization. Then she reached in her deep coat pocket and summoned a flamethrower. Pointed dead between the eyes. Though she could not see them. Robert winced. A chime dinged in the distance. Sorry. I didn't mean bad guy, literally. This is what I meant with the sarcasm. Alice was undeterred, she reached along the barrel and clicked a preparatory switch. So you're the double agent? Who knew? It won't matter if we're both dead. Elevator. Eek. Bistritz. As a stratospheric bat. Had zero grasp of the inner workings of elevators, he'd had no way of knowing that the open door before him was fast becoming a tight squeeze. Thanks to Robert's warning. He turned sideways in the nick of time and nearly smacked into a corner. Banging the wall with his side. Thump. And then all was quiet. What was that? Said no one. For none among the small crowd of guards in this elevator had ever associated with the others. And to say their first words now. In a cramped environment where every sound was an irritation. Would have been vastly uncomfortable. The door closed. One officer sniffled. Hey. Is that garlic? Is that a new perfume? I like it. Nobody replied. It was as uncomfortable as they had feared. A minute later, a minute of silence and staying put as Alice kept her sights in the precise center of Robert's forehead, and the doors reopened. And the werewolves shuffled out all at once. Bistritz and his riders all released their held breath. They stayed inside the closed elevator. The better for to speak. I don't get this proving yourself business, said Robert. Doing his best to act as if he were dauntless of the thrower. It feels artificial. Alice. And that's why I've never stopped suspecting you. Or is that what humanity is like now? Alice turned these words over in her mind and then she lowered the weapon. I guess it's not a problem of humanity. It's a problem of time taking humans away from me. Or humanity away from you? Now you're just looking for ways to be angry. You're just bitter. Aren't you? He looked in her face most fiercely. Though all he saw was the wall. He said accusingly. Who's bitter? What's he saying? Said Alice. And the recognition of an invisibat's pain made her voice a little sorry to have offended him. And ever so slightly tender. Robert's voice went through the same amelioration. He says there's no need for us to fight. That this is the absolute worst time. And he accepts you as a friend. He has no stake in it, she said automatically. The elevator had been going down for several seconds, now it began to slow. And Bistritz began crawling toward the exit. It's not always about stakes. Alice. You can do good for someone without getting anything out of it. You can put yourself on the line for a stranger. In fact, that's how our whole mission started. We were working for a planet we don't even know. For the principle of the thing. Then when trials joined, we added negotiation for recovery of the moon, and it was your idea to add the planet that we all live on. Eek. 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 Robert chuckled. Right. It's a heck of a fine idea. The door opened to a hallway as slick as the last. But with gray chromine instead of white. These floors were not designed primarily for the tough yet supple, careful feet of trained guards, but for lab assistants. Their unrefined scientific gaits. Before a pair of leather shoes and its hanging lab coat could march into the elevator, Bistritz flitted out. Close to soundless, and the elevator moved on. There went Officer gruffly striding down the hall, pushing the werewolf shark jaw through with him. The open, sunny lobby became claustrophobic. Not because the walls drew their arms in or the windows self-shuttered, but because the people seemed to have multiplied. "Out of the way," said gruffly in vain. But the pedestrian cluster, heedless and tactless, continued moving at 7 steps a minute. "Cripes, this shortcut's not gonna work." Then, back to the aquarium. Jaw presumed the officer had not said. It would either be the aquarium, some surgeon's desk, or the underground prison. The veteran could think of nothing likelier or worse. "Let's go back," said gruffly as he rotated Jaw toward whence they'd come. Like he was a hairified shopping cart, but the crowd had filled in behind them. And there was no budging. He bemoaned it with a groan. "Well, officer, if you hold on a little tighter, I can make us both intangible and run us right through this mess," said Jaw, Boy Scout-like. "And just drag yourself to prison?" "Yes sir," he said. "Right chipper. With me at your whim." "Yes sir. If you like." "Sir." Gruffly turned his nose up, even relaxing his grip by 1 degree. "Yeah. Right. Thank you, sir," said Jaw, and he faded into ether. The too kind officer's hand dropped. He felt nothing beneath it but his own startled pant leg. Now it was the invisible, intangible, immaculate Jaw striding proud through the crowd, knowing not where he was going nor how to get there, but of perfect knowledge concerning his wits and Drac's hopes, and those wayfinding ways of the soldier that forced journeymen. He disguised his faintly garbage odor by keeping himself within the crowd, which cloaked him like so much chatty foliage. In his head he kept a natural compass, and the rudiments of building layout were established in that well-trained mind. Tracing the path of the crowd, he found a massy hall of blue walls, plush carpets, and self-evident popular appeal. The sign on the arched entryway, which Jaw passed by in no time flat, introduced this lair as the Brown House's supreme world history museum, the one, the only. Placards. Placards, oh the placards he read. For the first time in 20-odd years, some pair of eyes divined the history of the Sassafras Moon Expedition of 2149, and found an educated wonder in the white-green moon rock cradled in its case. Those eyes darted gaily on, buoyed by the spirits of a wonder-struck crowd. They fell upon a document so old that even they knew it well, the Declaration of Independence, which severed America's union with England. Next to it, and just as pristine, was the Declaration of Codependence, in which all countries decided, well, might as well have one government. Moving down a near-endless hall, feeling heady and lithe with knowledge, Jaw skimmed, like the time-stream stone, all the tales of the changing American flag. At delightful and educational length, the corridor came to a stop. He had reached a giant patchwork of hundreds of flags from around the globe. And as if this were the end of history, its placard gave a suitably rousing, happily ever after message to the quilt-like beast. Though the tapestry was 80 feet long, it still contained so many sections as to be illegible, even up close. Jaw basked in the marvel, the mystery, the world-spanning tyranny of this, the first copy of the world flag. He stood there for many minutes. The one-way passage and its abrupt halt. The ocean of werewolves making their awkward U-turns. And the majesty of the overlarge flag, they all conspired to instill a sense of dull finality in him. As if he should have had a beer in hand, and a beach chair behind, and a pair of shades through which to lazily take this scene in. He did not want to move. He stood on the verge of forgetting just what he had come to the Brown House for. Hypnotizing flag and saving skitter of a strange force in the neighboring vent. That little vent in the wall, just above the floor and nearly hidden by the corner of the flagmalgam, produced a little symphony of scratches. Sounds of mechanical malfunction or of struggle. Jaw's ears pivoted to the ground. And in a flash, he had run to it. Begun to look down in it. It was too dark. However, darker than a foxhole. 'Twas a cat hole. In fact, as he learned when he faded most ghost-like down through the floor and poked his transparent head through the ventilation wall. 'Twas a cat in them pipes. Her limbs striving to bolt themselves to the sides in imitation of the beef arms of an action hero. And when he looked at her, he felt some measure of horror, not a horror that compared to a battlefield loss, but a different one. Equal, almost, to what the soldier feels when his cover has been blown. No, when his cover was never a cover at all. When his cover was a joke. When the enemy had seen him from first to last. The black cat, with quivering limbs, was staring right into his eyes. Ah! Jaw did not shout, he did not even whisper such a thing. Instead he told her, with false composure, "A cat in the doghouse, imagine that. I like it. Now, what are you doing trying to get into that crowded museum up there?" Was that a twitch of recognition in her face? A receptive sign that she knew the English language? She dropped down, instantly let go of the walls, and plopped onto a vent floor several feet down. It sounded like it hurt. Then again, cats have soft paws. Had the cat never truly seen Jaw at all? Had that voice from nowhere spooked her so deeply that she dropped out of sight? Forced to re-navigate these chambers? Jaw hoped not. He chose not to worry about it. To a trespasser. The vents of the brown house were twisted and cruel as the knots of a rat king. The werewolf shark, feeling free and easy, decided to follow them almost on a whim. To see where they might take him, the answer was, unfortunately, that they might take him to thousands of irrelevant locations and a couple of good ones. And the cat, deterred from her earlier path by the words of a secret ally, decided to change course and go low, very, very low. She had escaped from a temporary holding room, slipped out of a trap when their guards were down. They had not hurt her, but they had certainly incapacitated her. Peanut butter, hang that peanut butter. Still grabbed her gob. For those officers had, with their kitchen utensils, forcibly reapplied it. Now trials rolled gradually from floor to floor, not knowing what lay at the bottom. Only feeling that the very top and the very base should alike be important, and that the latter would take less effort to reach. She would arrive in the prison by and by. But not with any speed. Exchanging the museum for the prison, of course, was not such a life-saving bargain as initially assumed. For pandemonium was fast overtaking that prison. Had it begun with the dinosaurs kicking torment of Adam? With the eyeball, now crushed, that had burrowed through rock, evidently to scry the terminating robot's golden secrets? Or had it begun, if I may humor you, with the waterline break which Helen had dismissed as nothing? These three actions cannot be separated. If you have guessed by now that Adam's tendrils, on its way to the warden, had stopped to drill a hole in a water pipe, then you have sussed out step one of Adam's prison puzzle. And, I dare say, deserve a substantial reward. Jaya Ergurg. Adam's groan did not stop the velociraptors kicking. In fact, it had the opposite effect. They were happy to hear him lurch from pain to outright agony, and they wanted more. The kicks intensified. And he crumbled, falling forward. At last, apart from the wall, they could see the papyrus tendril going from his back to a puny hole in the stone. But just for one instant before it slithered weakly back to him. What remained were the bruises, now becoming blood. A pool was forming below Adam and below clawed feet. Not what of blood, no. Not purely. It was blood and water. For the hole behind them was trickling like a wellspring and then streaming. The raptors looked at each other. Then they flicked their tongues. Which I believe was their equivalent of a shrug. The kicking continued and was merely enlivened by this change. The kick fest became a splash fest. Intermittently, Adam cried out. No cry was so strong as the one spawned by the juicing of his eye. And had the velociraptors been more clever, they would have heard, in the cries that did leave him, a secret smile. A recent kick in the stomach had gotten him to upchuck blood. Yes, he moaned. Blood dripping down his lower jaw. Finally, a return to Adam's first friend, the word. You let your victim lead you to your doom? What cooperative foes you are. An honest-to-goodness, covered-in-bloodness laugh escaped him then. Look around you. You lizardlings, unmindful, look and think, should you not call a janitor? A dozen tongue flicks were exchanged. The four raptors stepped back to observe the prison. They need not have looked to know the damages. For the proof was at their feet. And above them, to their kneecaps. And sloshing all about them. Water was clearly leaking in from more holes than one. The whole prison had attained notable inches of the wet stuff. And through it the slightest pinkish tint, from Adam's own blood, was spreading. The prisoners had been griping about it in the background for a while now, scowling at their soggy clothes. So too had been griping the terminating robot, issuing commands from his box high above, and knocking out oil cans in hot rage. But Adam was pleased as punch as diluted vampire punch. He hollered now through a reddish-purple throat, his voice scraping through his throat like a wild sweep up a massacred piano. My fellow inmates, he boomed. Will you take a crazy risk? Will you bend to the water and offer your tongues? The echo traveled. 1,000 prison murmurs answered the prison call. He wants us to lick that? You. Don't mind if I do, said the old man with the convenient spoon. And he shoveled a morsel into his mouth. His pupils dilated. And his guts curdled. He yelped. And began to scrape the metallic flavor off his palate. But then the flavor settled, bringing with it a taste of superpower. Yeah. He wretched. But then he knew the powers of the wretched of the vampire. Adam had raised his blood vampire concentration. With a mighty splash and a delirious laugh, the old man leaped to his feet. Scree, he cried. I guess such a cry was among the many calls of the vampire. You scalawag. Adam. You gave me treatment. And now, he added as he turned to the Dinos with a bear wrestling pose. Have at ye. He catapulted himself into the guards with a spunk not remembered since age 24. With a terrifying pugilistic fervor, he latched onto one guard, who wavered and swung in a panic. He raised the spoon high, ready to stab it like a dagger. Sir. Please, said Adam, almost submerged in water that bloomed with red, his voice rasping and tremulous. Do not waste your time, break the bars. And make your escape. In the distance, a man who might have been a little bit psycho said. Whoa, old man's got moves. His remark had been remarkably loud. It carried a verve of excitement throughout that prison. And not 10 seconds passed before every prisoner on that flooding first floor was cupping hands, bending to the pinkening water, and sipping happily, for to gain that vampire edge. Whether they could take on armored guards was another question. And Adam did not care to stay for the answer. How would he leave in his present ragged state? With faith, effort, and the help of a cat who, a quarter mile away and from 500 feet up, had just fallen from a ventilation shaft to the prison's tidal waters. And perhaps if the terminating robot met him face to face, such a rival would serve as incentive to leave all the faster. War and manufactured science, how often do these two rub shoulders? And with what disastrous consequences? I need not remind you that few technologies have been so widespread as the gun. And that while alchemy has turned nothing as yet to gold, we have splendid results from gunpowder. Indeed, even the primitive pike, such as speared the heads of a certain Vlad's enemies once upon a time, was the result of careful study and, I find it likely, many ancient researchers in trailing white frocks. Never does it surprise us, then, when a blazing cannon drops fire on the battlefield. So why, when a similar bomb hurtles through a lab, are we suddenly so shocked? Why does it seem as unnatural as going from death to life? Something startlingly like a bomb streaked past the vent. And Jaw was there, peering into the hall. To see it. It whizzed away, sparking a flashback. Brief and instant. And a feeling of here we go again. Its trail of smoke now clogged the ceiling of this gray hall, triggering one of the omnipresent sirens, which screamed and turned the hall from gray to red, as the sirens were wont to do. A door, normally pinned shut by a titanic combination of keypad passcodes, laser eye recognition, and deadbolts, was wrenched open to loose 3 football teams' worth of monster hunting guards, who charged in all directions, left and right. Jaw quickly lost track of the action. From far off in one direction, he heard an explosion whose iconic sound could only be called picturesque. Everywhere else, he heard barking commands, some of them literal barks, and a flurry of weapons with their death-making doom. Most of their cybernetic future stuff was beyond his comprehension. But what mattered was, this was war, he did not need to be told. What mattered was, somewhere in that chaos, there was a chorus of cries much unlike a soldier's, unlike a werewolf's. In fact, unlike any civilians unless those civilians had shrimpy voices. Being very tiny, he slipped out from the vent, from the wall, quite ghostily, and followed that urge to become a saving angel. Call it foolhardy. Call it making up for past mistakes, or simply say that it answered the call. Jaw whipped the invisible doughboy helmet out from his invisible backpack as he ran. He set the intangible hat on his intangible head. And it did not fall through. He dashed into the backs of warriors. And a mess of mottled brown and black and red like flames passed around. Into. Beyond his eyes, and then he reached the clearing, if it could be called that. He came into the relatively empty space ruined by a prior bomb blast, into which their guns were now pointed, into which a bat and its bizarre passengers had fallen, wings and clothes charred. Also, more bizarrely, next to that bat was an unharmed flower pot with some writhing blue mushrooms in it. Great! Just when he had thought a tiny bat with tiny animal people was hard enough to process. What were those mushrooms? A biokinetic 31st century living mine? The shark wolf could hardly guess. But they looked important. The previous paragraph transpired in about half a second. In the next half second, Jaw ladled all 4 of these characters into his invisible, intangible hands, which turned them all similarly invisible and intangible, reared his foot back, and punted them sideways into a neighboring room. In that same moment, the guards' laser rifles converged on Jaw's grounded invisibankle, leaving not a wound nor scarcely even a tickle. He turned to face the enemy line. One of the enemy lines. For there was another party. Not distant for long. Coming into the hallway from behind. But let us allow Jaw to concentrate on as few as he can. Had he known a smidgen more about this century, he would have gathered that these guards were quick thinkers, suspecting some invisible play. The fighters in front depocketed their ghost goggles and telescopes, while the troops behind them unveiled spirit-hitting plasma blasters. What mattered, however, was gumption against gumption. Jaw knew it was time to crush his own moon. Dispel the werewolf to become full shark. This mattered not because it changed his arsenal, but because it was the way he most loved to be, and he now felt free to go berserk. The labs in this corridor were empty. For the most part. But reader, let our attention drift to the one right beside Jaw, wherein new visitors had abruptly arrived. To the dark lab. Stubbornly dark. With no windows on the walls. The window in the door may as well not have existed. For what little light it actually admitted, the red light of the emergency siren, once overwhelming, was as minor and stifled as a television glow. The quiet lab. Ironically quiet. For it fed the Flatoidan plan. Its dinner platters were petri dishes. And the sounds of the rustling molecules such infinitesimal sounds. Those were the end-of-dinner bells. Death rattles for the ways of an alien world. The witness lab. Cold witness. Give it a mouth to speak. And ears to hear. And an eye to see the Arcturus laser now firing from Jaw's mouth. Turning a red hull to every color under the sun. And do you reckon it would know what valor it had seen? Do you reckon it would say bravo? Certain heroes, however, would watch the window feeling much bewildered. Robert, Alice, and Bistritz had skidded into the middle of a chloroceramic tile floor. The mushroom pot had cracked apart a few inches away, but posed no present threat. For an inch was a mighty distance now. Robert and Alice had risen onto their shins. Bistritz, his invisibility flickering, was trying to rise, but resembled a fallen and storm-beaten tent. They all watched the window for a while, tantalized. "What do you suppose that is?" said Robert. Voice as calm as though this were a picnic. "Probably an ally we haven't met yet," said Alice. Robert hummed appreciatively. "That's beautiful." Alice. "That wasn't a metaphor, I don't do metaphors." "Really?" "Oh." With Bistritz thus injured and no convenient mouse holes about, it would be tough to continue their little Zesk adventures. Therefore, Alice passed a morsel of edamame and brought herself and Robert back to normal size. She took some gauze from her coat and bandaged up Bistritz as best as she could. Robert slid him gingerly into his suit jacket, from which his front claws, snout, and shiny eyes poked out. Oasis? This lab was. Though it should have been a hotbed of danger of threats both bacterial and combatual, none of the weapons outside were aiming their way. And the shockwaves of destruction, though they rocked the room at intervals, dealt no damage. So they were free to walk, and even stroll, up to desks and microscopes, to loaded cabinets, to samples which were gold to them. No purer alchemy than this. Robert swung two cabinet doors wide open and squinted at the labels on the dishes therein. "WERB?" He shook his head. "It's too dark in here." "You want the light switch," said Alice, who was leveling a magnifying glass at counter full of who knew what. "Sure. What's the harm? What if the battle calms down? It might be suspicious if we give off too much light of our own." So in lieu of the switch, she tossed a flashlight to Robert. And they tacitly agreed, better safe than sorry. Now that he cast the light upon things, the sea creature could really see. He had revealed a whole trove of failed samples. Werewolfism strains whose timed release was off. Ah! The complexities of biological experimentation. Werewolf 15.5 hours, Werewolf 20.8 days. He shut the doors. You'd think that by the year 3001, the best scientists in the world would have it down to well a science. With a stroke of her analytic chin, Alice said, "This is a great opportunity, Robert. I bet they have the primary strains here." "Strains? There's two. I heard enough of their plan to know." "I agree if the failed experiments are here. The first copy of the real thing might be too. But not the thing itself. They wouldn't just leave it here until the time of the aliens. Would they? They'd keep it with Igor's guards." Or they'd just keep it with Igor. In the designated Igor place. Agreed. That's why this opportunity is so great, it can lead us right to the heart of this. Now it was coming together in Robert's mind as well. Your nose is really that sensitive? Huh. Every nose is that sensitive. Do you know how tiny the difference between orange scent and pine scent is? Yet even the most plebeian nose won't confuse them. Now. Come on, let's sniff out those molecules. They turned that laboratory inside out like a couple of inordinately slow, surprisingly respectful partiers. Lockers worth of petri dishes spilled out in landslide heaps were lifted, examined, and delicately set back inside. The countertops were glimpsed. Their test tubes smelled with fascination. And then there was nothing. A waste of 15 minutes? If 'twere a waste, so be it, but there was one section they had not covered. Had saved for last, the ominous back of the room. More shadowed than the rest. Although imaginations might like to garb this scene in tapestry of cobweb and spiders of cave, it was thoroughly antiseptic and, as the light of 2 flashlights revealed, dustless and recently touched. What dominated the scene was a bedsheet draped over a chair-shaped frame. And clearly over something else. To the people-shaped contents of that frame. But were the contents truly a person? Could they, in fact, have been microbial samples? Or even one giant microbe? Well, that's not it, said Robert. I agree, said Alice. And I'm not in the least curious about what's inside. It must be some old Halloween prop. Or a dozing employee. It could be Igor himself. That's too stupid. I know, he admitted with a shrug. But I may as well throw out every guess. Alice sniffled. It smells like a robot. But I don't know any robots, or do I? Does it smell like bacteria? Yes. But that's not saying much. Everything's covered in bacteria. Even in the 31st century? The exchange was interrupted by a subtle noise and movement, the vibration and rattle of a small electronic, which jimmied the tablecloth small ly but surely. Alice was the one to notice. To catch her breath. To raise the hand that paused Robert. Without a word. She got her flamethrower, Robert his as well, and they pulled the triggers and the flames were spewed. So much hot breath from handheld behemoths. Consuming the white tablecloth in a flash. And yearning to taste the robot. Robot. Through the blazing light they could see vague features, uncanny eyes. Apparently human but dry as stone. And all the rest like mechanical skin painted onto a stern-faced woman that paint imperfect. Flakes and cracks and all. She was stronger, however, than the average tin toy. Her mecha flesh would not burn in flames that soft. The robot was active, she went from stoic to smiling. Try lasers, said Alice. Still holding out flames. Holding out hope. Robert swapped out his gun, but not fast enough to attempt a shot. For the blazing robot's blazing hand had taken hold of the werewolf. The robotic woman chirped. Alice. And a gigavolt charged her body. Flesh rattled against bone. Nerves charred. The brain-stopped commands of the mind were replaced by bootless spasms. And the stumped flesh, with brown hair charring, sizzling, submitted and obeyed. The body was dropped, singed and smoking. And the robot on fire, now standing from her throne, set sights on Robert and his trembling gun. He managed to shoot her twice. In the face and chest. The lasers made faint fissures. But they did not slow. Did nothing to deter her. Robert reholstered the gun and threw his hands up. How could he fight fire? Which would burn his gills? He was also troubled by her hazy familiarity. That voice it had billowed through the halls of his own Galapagos home. During Brown House announcements. The First Lady, he gasped. And a confused current ran through him, instinctive feelings for the robot monster, sympathy and disbelief. But she was ignoring him. As the fire, harmless, cocooned her, Helen's fingers played about her wrist device. And her grin intensity fell by half. Then she said, as if to herself, 2 down. 2 in prison. 1 unaccounted for. And 1 both active and right in front of me. Or 2? Bistritz tunneled further into the pocket. Out of sight. Robert began stepping back. Helen sighed. Getting some tactical distance? Look. You know you've lost. We haven't. I meant you. Yourself. And I have places to be. She pointed at him like a Zeus on high. Her lightning itself became royal decree, jumping from her hand to Robert's forehead to knock him back. Sent him crashing on the ground. Turning around, she used that flaming hand to open a big window's blinds. Sunlight bounded in, along with the light of even more fire crawling on those same blinds. A moment was spent seeing the brown house lawn far below. Why was such a bizarre figure as this robotic Helen about to fall 10 stories onto the lawn? Tucking and rolling into a secret prison ward vault? No citizen would know. To them it would be just another of today's mysteries. Helen backed away and raised her firearms, preparing for a cartwheel. Here goes. Hup. She wheeled and something hit her hard in the back, interrupting her at the critical glass-busting moment. Instead of spiraling majestically, she flopped, ragdolling down. Inside of the lab she had left, Robert and Alice remained on the tile. And Bistritz within the suit pocket. What had changed was the presence, or lack thereof, of Alice's heap of blue mushrooms, thrown by the fishman's trusty throw-in hand. As the werewolf laid unconscious, he sat up moaning, rubbing an aching but not decimated head. Soon, he would crawl to the window and see for himself what was out there. He might even brave the hallway. Its predators lurking. Great brown sharks in red water. He decided, for now, to take a small break. Lighting his pipe with a soap solution. Secure in thinking they all 3 had done their best. And wondering if wonderlandish mushrooms were possibly fireproof. The earth was on that swivel-chaining afternoon to evening, meaning time again for the 5 o'clock news. With your host Charles Dogson. Good evening. And thank you folks for tuning in. Dogson here. And I have a very special report this holiday. A cheesy graphic of a little green man popped up beside him. The news anchor looked pleased and a little perplexed to add. Aliens. Are they real? If they are, is their physiology close enough to ours to allow for werewolfinization? The answer to all of these questions is a resounding yes. The current and hopefully eternal Brown House administration just released numerous reports, studies, and even dialogues from what has been an 8-year-long run of contact with bizarre humanoids from the planet Flutoid. He chuckled and said, with a knowing glance at his ever-revolving mini-moon, let's hope they're not bizarre for long. But our top story of the day is. An arm emerged from off-screen, dropped a flood of papers on his desk, and swung away. Oh, said Dogson, shoving the delivery into a messy stack. It appears we have breaking news. The Brown House has chosen today, Independence Day, as the date of first contact, when alien diplomats actually descend to Earth, however briefly, and interact with. Yet another arm came, with still more papers. Oh boy, piped Dogson. Developments are coming faster than you can shake a stick at. A moon mining plan for Flutoid is in the works and, Igor claims, certain to be accepted by the Flutoidans. Because the werewolfinization process will begin as soon as they hit Earth. He pumped his fist. Genius. Igor. Love that man. But there seemed no end to the good news. A third pile sprang upon his desk. And this sent Dog's son into a state approaching rapture. Oh dear. Oh boy. Oh dear. Oh boy. He looked into the eyes of the camera wolves and asked. Softly now. Can I see it? Following came a flurry of murmurs. Evidence of a set as entirely in uproar as the anchorwolfman himself. The words could not be distinguished. But the falling face of Dog's son told all. He took a deep, resignated breath and continued. I'll be keeping you company in the studio while our on-the-spot reporter Animal Wolfen, he growled. We'll see the alien landing in person. And you can too, he said with a point at the camera, more of a jab. At approximately 8 o'clock on the Brown House lawn. Hold it. A werewolf of some authority plunked himself in the newsdesk's second chair. The camera hastily zoomed out to see him. Dan Van Helsing had come. His hat askew and his eyes many-ringed. He snubbed Dog's son and spoke directly to the camera. This is Dan Van Helsing here. And I'd like to issue a public announcement from the administration, stay off the Brown House lawn. If why would? We're reaching carry-in capacity and the ground is beginning to sink in. The resultant sinkhole would break all your bones. Thank you, Mr. Van Helsing, whispered Dog's son. Tearful. Thankful. Another present of paper came to Dog's son from the off-screen beyond. He read. The live footage you'll be seeing comes not from the lawn, but from the top of the Brown House itself? The paper crumpled in his claws, he screamed. Cut to footage from the Brown House roof. From a camera which looked down upon that overholding lawn. Yes. That lawn was packed. No grass could be spotted between the dark gates and trees, nor could those gates or trees be seen, for all were smothered in werewolves. Sign carriers. Megaphoners. Boomboxers. Picnicites gawkers. Non-believers. Protesters. Alien lovers. All in a humming throng. Brown mass. Looking to the sky. Prepared to wait in this rocker for hours, for what was an hour to the chance of a lifetime? Officers in blue and black could be seen. Just barely. As dots attempting to push out parts of the crowd, but who would follow their command. Have safety in place of something to cherish in eternal memory. The aliens. The diamond sight? It is more accurate to say that the majority were not alien lovers, but UFO lovers. Few could refute the novelty of the coming strangers. But unless the Flatoidans were substantially wolf-like, the werewolves were not interested in seeing their ugly mugs, and that absolutely none could deny. This was the scene when a window broke below. When a figure on fire gave the crowd more reason to disperse and more means to perish. The moment the first riot guard unlatched the cast-hole iron door to the Brown House prison. She wished they had brought galoshes. Even from the top of a short stairway. Water was at their feet and rising. All right, hollered that one in front back to the rest. We guard this door with our lives. Pfft, said the one just behind. Flippant, because they spearheaded a literal Kiliad. No duh. Hey, cried the nearest prisoner. Their echo voice bending around a wall that disappeared into water at bottom and mist high above. That the way out? The guards flung themselves from the gate screeching. Laser pistols in their fingers. Knives strapped to their elbows. They entered the water like a mess of 1,000 doves, clumsy, but luminous and flapping their sharp edges everywhere. Little did they know they were about to engage the largest congregation of vampires this world has ever known. All this was observed by the terminating robot from his slew of terminals. He had not given the order to send 1,000 guards, he had sent an order to Helen. Who'd rerouted it to Dan, since he, not she, was the leader of the anti-monster SWAT. And something must have gotten lost in translation because he was sure he had requested galoshes and boats. And choppers. And marine gear. For the prison had become a marine situation. He turned on the intercom and cried. Go back. Back. Get some boats. Far too late. My man. And drowned out. The sound was. By the sheer pandemonium. Sound and fury beyond imagination. And beyond every prisoner's wildest hope. The terminating robot could not even trust his personal dino guards to help in the crisis. Being land animals. Nor could he activate his traps. His beloved traps, the electrocutable prison bars. In truth, he would not have minded flipping an electric switch a minute ago. When the current would have passed deathlike through the floor entire. When the only casualties on the brown house's side would have been 4 lowly guards. Now those blasted workers were swimming here and there and everywhere. And the terminating robot could not have valuable dead on his shiny golden hands. As he could see from his screens. Those pinkening waves now covered 3/4 of the highest cells on the first floor. In the middle of waves. Still sequestered in its box. The great train. Too. Was becoming a vampire. Amazingly. And without changing its original black painted color. It seemed to grow ashen. To change in texture and there. Unmistakably on the sides. Were extending bat wings. Sleek. Impressive. And clearly not functional. This train would not miss out on the fun. Chugga chugga chugga. It rumbled. Building steam. Building volume. Storming forward. Building speed. It broke the bars. It did not bleed. I want to cry, said the terminating robot to himself in a brief solemn moment. Yet when he blinked, he only shed the same blue light. A teardrop's sorry substitute. The bars fell crumbling. His life's new purpose was gone. Yes. His wife still lived. But once he lost this warden job. As he knew he would. Their life as they knew it would end. And she. Maybe. Would walk off to someone else. In the end. However. He was a robot. He had certain duties to uphold. How to terminate this feeling? By taking matters into his own beautiful hands. He cracked his knuckles. They did not make cracking sounds, they were liquimetal. Then he somersaulted into the hole that Adam's papyrus had drilled and made a beeline for the monster. That genius instigator. So the liquid snake descended on his prey. Down below. In a first floor utterly submerged. A bevy of vampires swam free. Against their headbutts and the pounding of their fists. So many bars had come away as easily as plastic. Ebullient cries of thanks rang loud. Not all of those cries knew whom they were thanking. And only one among them knew his name. But they all knew his blood. And through that he was made brother. Adam. Who continued to bleed out. Had crawled onto his cell mattress, it. Like all of the first floor furniture. Was bobbing in the waters. With skillful use of his papyrus. Having it take the form of paddles or rudders. He could propel himself to an exit or. Failing that. A wall or at the very least a safe corner. For the waters were rapids. And for every swimmer there was a mattress. Rock chunk. Or makeshift boat bundle of blanket wound around a prison bar frame. Were it not for the underground darkness. And were it not for the belligerences happening all around as guards leaped onto sailing prisoners and prisoners swiped at guards. This could easily have been confused with a whimsical river raft scene. A black mass plopped onto Adam's mattress. Sending it all end over end into the water. Frantic floundering. Gasps. An eyeball and a socket burning with water sting. He refound the mattress. Clutched it. Pulled himself to the top. And realized that. Quite unintentionally. His other arm had grabbed that treacherous black furry mass. Trials, gaped Adam. And he felt not only bewildered but sorry. Suspecting her fear of water. She wriggled out from his arm and shook the drips from her feline person. He found it within himself to giggle. Noah acquires his first animal. Eh? Trials did not reply. Nor did his ghastly appearance seem to have left her spooked. She worked her jaws, making peanut butter eating sounds. Adam, perplexed, peeked in her mouth. Old butter, gross yeggods. He flinched. Trials walked to the edge and slammed her head back into the water, her entire head. Adam, seeing past this quirky image, knew she was using the highly unsanitary water to dissolve the snack. His shoulder blade, a voice in the mind, piped up, that treacherous goo in her mouth hints at a knowledgeable outside enemy. And does not bode well. What? You two stick together, chap. Here, Adam murmured aloud to his shoulder. Hear what? Said the ungummed Trials. She was raising her cat eyebrow. Which, I suppose, would be one of those confounding antenna whiskers that cats have above their cat eyes. Ah. Nothing. And despite all his pains, Adam laughed again. For happiness plain and simple. Not only was prison good as done, but his dear friend the cat was back. An intervening saint could not have done him better. The mattress gave another startling jolt. For a swimming werewolf had thumped into their mattress. Freestyling past his target was elsewhere. Then from the other side, a raft of 4 prisoners' beds daisy-chained together made an uncommon rock, such that our hero's vessel flew a foot into the air and splashed back down. Adam and Trials held on with tenacious grips, their mattress bobbed and revolved down the hallway, self-directed as a daisy's wind-blown petal. Trials took her first look around. Mwio, she commentated. This flood was you, right? He said nothing. The cat snickered, he snickered too. They shared a feeling of pride and power, good fortune, and mounting laughter. Of feeling themselves in the heart of the absurd. And they very nearly thought that if this wacky wonder was to be their tomb, nothing could be more perfect, so be it. Adam pushed himself upright into a crouch. 'Tis about time we try for a way out, he said. Less to Trials than to himself. And to his several inner voices. His red paper strips trickled off from his flesh, and as if to make up for his corporeal weakness, each one glowed with the color of a sunrise sky. The mattress and waters danced with dawnish light. Trials stared at him as if regarding a lantern. Adam only hoped she was not reminded of her blazing namesake. Her gaze wandered, however, sliding slow as a snail to Adam's back. Something particularly sunny was shining between his shoulders and neck, a liquimetal smear, expanding and shifting into a man, his hand grasping Adam's neck. Adam felt the terminating robot upon him and lurched forward too late. The warden tugged him back and, wrestler-like, wrapped an arm around his head. The hardening metal crushed his eye holes like a long, forearm-shaped rock. A headlock and, if he should choose to tighten the hand around his throat, a deadlock. Trials arched her back, leaped aside. But the battle was moving too quickly for her to think a spell before. Papyrus spikes darted out from all over Adam to ward off the warden. A million daggers launched. But from the terminating robot sprang a million tiny pairs of golden scissors, there to cut them off. It was an immaculate defense and a painful one. For the papers were truly part of Adam, like dry veins. Adam screamed before the robot smothered his mouth with a third arm. A third hand. That automated man, with his mouth close enough to spit in Adam's single eye, muttered frostily, "Hasta la vista, adult." Then Trials magicked up a rock which flew into the robot's face. It missed. For the terminating robot had pulled both himself and his adversary into the luminant lake, the pond-like pink marble now suffused with the light of Adam's vermilion strips, though they be cut to the root. One golden arm was on Adam's face, and 2 strangled him. And they all went speeding through a thicket of bubbles tinted orangey-red by both Adam's glow and the liquimetal shine. A gasp from Adam's chest joined the thicket. His eye rolled. The terminating robot fancied he saw Adam's death, till he realized that the face and limpening form must have been a feint. For the vamp mummy's neck was so maddeningly thick that he knew he could not have choked it out sufficiently. Interesting, but the terminating robot would fain leave his foe without making quite sure he was incapacitated. He simply choked harder. And began to feel the petrific flesh. Its density and texture like bone or stone. Cracking apart. That sunset glow emanating from his person, which had turned the underwater world into a lava lamp, now dwindled. And the robot smiled. I mean, it was hard to tell. With his face like a skeleton's and all. The fingers on Adam's throat became blades. A lacerated throat. No. A solar explosion. In one motion and a sunburst that came like a very deep cough from his chest. Adam unbound himself. The terminating robot was flung off. Covered in what felt to him like burns. Though he remained underwater all the while. Was it the steam now rising in golden bubbles that singed him? He concluded yes. Adam remained struggling. Gulping in water. Hunting for air. Swimming up toward a water surface he could not find, paddling, wishing ammonious ra had been kinder with his strength until he broke out. Gasping the air of a bubble produced by Trial's own magic. Crawling through and then onto the bubble's soapy, wobbling floor was an odd, illogical thing. Trials watched him. Sitting with elegant poise. And when she knew he was secure, she flung her head upward, commanding the bubble to fly surfaceward. From the steaming depths of that miniature ocean, a golden hand extended. Stretched. Stretched impossibly far, not far. Not fast enough. There the robot sank. The bubble went up. Up. Up ever higher. Onto the surface and then beyond. Into the air of 100-foot prison. The waves had reached the second floor now, Adam and Trials saw from bird's eye view. In between the rafts. The motionless bodies of dogs and bat-like humans that bobbed on the rising tide. And they could see. Here and there. When they squinted. Grains of rice in the waves. Consciously scattered by intelligent guards. For the rice was distracting some of the prisoners. Who bent down from their rafts to sift. Stupidly. Through the kernels. The bubble burst. They fell. Plummeting into the water and struggling for seconds again. They groped for a mattress or a handhold and, at last, found a divot in a wall. Adam clung to it with one hand, Trials struggled onto his shoulder. Together they panted for half a minute. And during their reprieve, a slightly vampiric raven landed on a ledge 10 feet above. Trials, Adam exhaled. Did you see that rice over there? No. I didn't. He'll will congeal. And just like that, Adam restored. Only his eye was still missing. Trials clicked her tongue. Well. Drats on rats. It is perfect, he insisted. Rubbing his face with the free hand. Well, no use in further dallying. We must get out of here. Funny, I just broke in. Sir. Sir. Adam cried to a passing mattress. His arm extended as if hailing a taxi. Mr. Vampire. Sir. Any chance you could lead me to the exit? Sorry. Mummy. No dice, said the ad hoc captain with a compassionate shrug. We all got the same question. And the bed swam by like a schooner in plague times. Don't ask them, said Trials with a sly lilt. Ask the raven. Mr. Raven. Sir. Where be it? The exit? Nevermore, it quoth. Adam pursed his lips. Well. I didn't mean literally. Oh. Now I see you mean. Take to the skies again. But as this papyrus is not sturdy enough to produce wings, we will have to get creative. At that moment, an enormous golden spear pierced through the stone beside Trials and Adam, leaving a sound like a screech and a deep, jagged gash. Adam lost his grip. The duo fell headlong, thrashing, glugging lugs and then bobbing in the sea, a foot away from the cat. The mum man looked over his shoulder just long enough to catch, rising out of the marble lake, that golden demon. The terminating robot fancied this was his moment. He smiled fiendishly and said a second time, "Hasta la vista, adult." And then he dove forward, his very hand spear-tipped. Adam's papyrus flew to his hair, then spidered out. First into a tangle of flat paddles, then into dagger ends, hooks, teeth. Whatever came to mind, anything would do in a pinch, as he reached, then scaled the wall. The golden ender was hot on the trail, his own spider limbs gashunking up the stone. Trials clung to one arm, swinging in and out. Dazzlingly fast, she was hardly noticed. For this was the single-minded pursuit of revenge. Indeed, soon she would fall. The two brawlers skittered up and along the 100-foot wall, their path erratic, their holy steps worth tens of thousands in damages. Eventually, they would ascend to that sky ceiling, turn a vent into a crater, and climb out into. Would it be too abrupt to shift our focus to a certain other vampire? Not the leader of the nominally free, nominally only world, but that leader of something smaller and yet, in the ideological sense, perhaps larger? Would you forgive me? Or would you begrudge me this? To fight against this disorientation, to stick by the side of the friend you have known for so many long paragraphs, what could be more natural? Staying with Adam, with a rediscovered friend. How dare I begrudge you that? How dare the world run on caprice and chance? How dare it consign Dracula to that perishment in flames? In the sunburst chamber, the werewolf guards stepped tentatively in, their black garb concealed but a fraction of the deadly bright. They saw a figure encased in flame, then a figure disappearing, and then nothing but the flame itself. And then even that was gone. And a mist passed between the bodies, freeing itself from prison bright. The mist was not felt, for it moved strategically between shields and heavy fabrics. Becoming an invisible mist puts the body in a temporary 0-1 state. Are you well? Or are you unwell? Are you mobile now? Or too far gone, and thereby dissipated into nothing? As Dracula was more undead than dead, he felt wonderful now, to the binary extent that mist can feel. As soon as 5 minutes ran out, however, he would plunge back into that painful body and lay helpless. If only his allies the fishmen, Wolfwoman and Homebat had stayed in that hall but a few moments longer. Ah! But old Vlad, he could hear Robert saying. He's always got a trick up his well-cuffed sleeve. This bundle of mist felt the best direction to go was up. The safest? No, the most certain road to Igor. Certainly not, yet and still. If any two places had a chance of harboring him, they were, in his mind, that oblong office and the brown house roof. And so, yearning for an old friend, he drifted up at choicest speed, through the nearest air vent.